railing of the balcony outside his quarters and looked out at the courtyard below. Castle Black had truly come alive again. There were times when he could close his eyes and imagine that just for a moment the years had rolled back and that the gate might open at any time to admit Bloodraven. The castle bustled with people as supplies and men and yes even women rolled in. Help for the war. Help for the Night's Watch. Help against the others. There were also times when he wanted to reach back in time, grab the heads of his ancestors and bash them against each other until common bloody sense entered their thick skulls. Few of them had ever seen the war. More had scorned it and the Night's Watch. They'd foolishly viewed the latter as the private army of the Starks, something that had never been true. He had often wondered what might have happened if someone like Aegon the Conqueror had ever seen the war. Yes, his ancestor had been to Winterfell, but he never saw the war. Surely the sight of it would have triggered something. Men would not have built such a thing without a reason and men could not have constructed it without magic. And a man or a woman on a dragon would and should have seen that. Felt that. Ah, magic. He had often wondered about that. Why did it ebb and flow? Did it even ebb to the point that some of his brothers at the Citadel so insisted? Why had the dragons vanished? Surely if the dragons had died off at Dragonstone and the Dragon Pit, or whatever was left of the latter, because of the ebbing of magic, then why had the wall not suffered damage or the others never woken up? And the others had been awake and murdering their way to the north of the wall long before Daenerys had hatched her dragons. It had all brought up most unwelcome memories of Aegon and the day that he had heard of his brother's death at Summerhall. He had his own suspicions about that. He sighed and then turned and entered his quarters. So much to do and so little time. He felt as if time was running against them now. Some instinct deep within him was calling out in warning and he had no idea why. It was then that he saw it. There was a canvas package on his desk, about the width of 2 hands and the height of a hand. There was a piece of parchment next to it. He peered about his quarters carefully. No one was there. Only then did he approach his desk. There was a name written on the parchment. Aemon Targaryen. Well, this was a poser. He started to reach out for it, before pausing and then pulling out the gloves that were folded into his belt. He slipped the gloves on, no sense taking any chances, not with the hairs on the back of his neck standing on edge, and then picked up the parchment and unfolded it. There was a message inside it. I was asked by a man who was a friend to a man who I owed a favor to if I could bring the package you see here to the blind Maester of Castle Black and then read it to him. As the old gods have restored your sight, my help is not needed, so I must remain in the shadows. If you have an answer to the package, then leave it here 2 days from now. I will ensure that it will find its way to the girl who sent it to you. And the note was unsigned. Interesting. The lettering was neat and had a certain SOZ style to it. He picked the package, noted the stitching and then pulled out his knife and carefully cut through it. There was a letter within. He unfolded it carefully. Ah. The handwriting was small and precise. That of a girl perhaps, and a well-educated one at that. My dear great-grand-uncle. I must apologize for never having previously written to you. My brother told me that little could be expected of you due to your age. My brother, as you might have heard by now, was wrong about many things. I need your advice. I need counsel about so very many things, and I apologize if this letter rambles or is confused in places. I have been told by a former counselor to my father that this letter will find its way to you unread by any other. I hope that it does. By now you may have heard that I have 3 dragons. The tale of how I got them is a dark one, but it is true. My brother killed a servant of the Magister of Pentos who was host to us both, before Viserys tried to kill me and another servant. The Magister interrupted my brother, but both then died in a fire that they accidentally started. I was trapped in a room to one side and I do not remember what then happened, just that when I was found in the embers of the room I had 3 tiny dragons on me. One of the Magisters said that my eyes flashed with silver light, but that must have been a trick of the light. Aemon felt himself pale at this, remembering a passage from a history of his family, but then gathered himself and started to read again. I am on my own in Pentos now, the last of family with the exception of you. I have 3 dragons and I am now the heir to the Iron Throne, but I am all but a prisoner here in the city. I am the guest of the Magisters, but I know the truth of the matter. The cage is a gilded one, but it is still a cage, both for me and my dragons. I know what the Magisters want of me. They stress that they just want to see my dragons grow fully and safely and that I should be protected as well. The truth is that they look at my dragons and instead see weapons of war. They hunger for war against Bravos, and then against any other city that they want to burn and then conquer, and they will use my dragons to do it. Already they are bringing me old tomes on dragon husbandry, some of them so old that they predate the Doom. That at least is a good thing, because I feel as if I am far out of my depth on such things. Did our ancestors have such books? If they did, then where are they now? I have been told of another matter by that old counselor to my father, a rather odd man called Varys. A more concerning one. I have been told that the existence of my dragons is known to the other cities and that they are already preparing for war. I do not want to be the reason behind any war. I do not know what to do. Should I stay in Pentos or try to flee? But if I flee, then to where? The other cities will seek to use me and my dragons the same way that Pentos dreams of using me. But where else? Andalos is abandoned and the Dothraki Sea increasingly empty. As for Westeros, I know that Robert Baratheon wished my brother dead and probably wants the same for me, and that the actions of my father and my brothers have diminished the standing of our house greatly, weakening any support there. If you can advise me in any way, I would be most grateful. You are the last living member of my family and I have no one else to turn to for advice. I send my love and respect. Daenerys Targaryen. He stood there for a long moment, staring down at the letter. He almost wanted to cry. There was a desperation in that letter, a need for advice and help and knowledge. And then he slowly nodded. Lord Stark needed to see this. He found the Lord of Winterfell talking quietly with the Magna of the Thons. Both had similar frowns of intent as they spoke in the language of the First Men, a language that Ned Stark was now apparently highly adept. They both noticed him arrive, with the Thon nodding to him, before bowing to Lord Stark and then taking his leave. "Can I help you, Maester Aemon?" Aemon looked about carefully and then handed the letter over. "It was in my chambers, I just found it. Its contents are most singular, Lord Stark." Ned Stark took the letter with a frown and read it. He had to give the man his due, his sole reaction was to briefly flicker an eyebrow up and down for an instant. "I wonder who delivered this here." I wondered the same thing. I must reply to my great-grand-niece though. She is alone in a pit of vipers and I am now the only family that she knows of. He looked at Lord Stark. 3 dragons would be a great help here at the wall, if it could be arranged. Easier said than done, Lord Stark rumbled as he pulled on his top lip. I see your point though. Robert would never agree to it, however. He is somewhat obdurate about members of your family. That said, I agree that you should advise her. She sounds desperate. Aemon nodded slowly. I will advise her to wait, but to watch the horizon for threats. The other 3 cities might well move against Pentos before her dragons have fully grown. I like it not that King Robert's Master of Whispers has been advising her as well. That worries me too. Robb told me that Varys is not a man to be trusted. Men shouted at the gates and they both turned as those gates opened to reveal a party of men headed by Sir Alliser Thorne and Benjen Stark, followed by Robb and Jon Stark, the Greyjoy boy and others. A smile stole over Ned Stark's face as his shoulders relaxed just a little from released tension. Write your letter, Maester Aemon. My party will be away at dawn, bound for Castle Black. Father. Robb Stark called as he dismounted. Maester Aemon. We have quite a tale to tell you. It seems that the writing of that letter will have to be put off. He looked at the party. Mance Rayder was there, as were most of those who had left, but who were the others? And why did Tyrion Lannister now have an axe carried in a leather scabbard over one shoulder? Gendry, acting as the blacksmith to the king's party, was actually making him both well known and well hidden. It was an odd combination. He was known as His Grace's natural son, true, but also as that blacksmith who swings his hammer bloody well. He knew that they were going a bit slower than his father might have liked and that they had actually paused for a day or so. They were a few days away from the King's Road, but just up ahead the bridge over the small tributary to the White Knife was in poor condition from too much usage over the past few months and urgent repairs were being made to it. Fair enough. It also meant that a lot of messages were coming in to be dealt with by his father and his uncle. He knew that. The business of the realm never ended, and he shuddered at how much had to be dealt with every day. The pause also meant that he had a chance to work on a few things himself and to spy out the lay of the land. A hard place, the north. He liked it. There was no sight on most people, little flummery. They were staying in another minor keep tonight, one owned by a vassal of the Sawins. It was a quiet place, made lively by the court, and he had done his usual thing of seeking out the blacksmith within it and volunteering to work in the smithy. Today he had repaired 2 daggers, a sword, a spear and 5 hoes. A lot of people were farming in the north. A lot. And there were those who were moving north to help and support them. The lorderling they were staying with, one Lord Idris, had recently celebrated the marriage of his oldest son to the daughter of a lorderling from the Riverlands. He seemed to smell something in the air, a feeling of liveliness. Action. The land seemed to be coming alive. Perhaps it was all in his head and he was imagining it. He hammered on the blade of the sickle that was now in front of him and drove out the silly thoughts that were crowding it. Just work the metal. Work the blade. Shape it. Fashion it. As he placed the sickle in the right quenching bucket for the right amount of time before finally pulling it out, he realized that he had company. A small blond boy was standing at the doorway. He was trembling with nerves, but the moment that he saw that he had been noticed he swallowed visibly and then stepped forwards. You're the blacksmith," the last word was said in a near squeak. He nodded. "I am. How may I help you, Prince Tommen?" The boy blanched even further, as if that was possible, before rallying. "Cousin Shireen said that you could be trusted." He peered at the boy. "I can be. What's wrong?" A piece of metal was held up in a trembling hand. "It's my stirrup," Prince Tommen all but whispered. "I broke it. It's all my fault. Father wants us to move fast and I was trying to, but when I dismounted it broke and..." Gendry stopped the desperate flow of words by reaching out and gently taking it from him, before smiling and then peering at it. It had once been high quality but long usage had worn it out. "Not your fault, it's old and worn. How long have you had it for?" Prince Tommen looked at him, confused. Years." He nodded. "Not your fault, my prince. You simply wore it out without meaning to. If you need to learn more about your tack, ask a groom. Now, don't worry about this, I can fix it easily." Tommen eyed him nervously. "Easily?" "Oh yes," he said as he looked through his tools and then started to choose a replacement piece of metal for the broken part. "It won't take long. You can watch if you like." This seemed to take the prince by surprise, judging by the way that he peered at Gendry. Then he looked at his feet. Would Joffrey ever know about this?" Gendry eyed him. "No, why would he need to?" There was a pause as Prince Tommen looked shifty. "He finds things out." Gendry knew that he was not a perceptive person, but he seemed to see something very clearly at that point. Tommen did not like the little blonde shit. "I won't tell him. I just mend things. Let me mend this. Best stand over there though, this place can be dangerous for someone who doesn't know the risks." As he fixed the piece of riding tackle he talked through exactly what he was doing, so that the prince knew what was happening. Tommen sat on a stool, safe in one corner, watching and occasionally asking a question. As time passed he seemed to relax and look less worried. When it was over and the stirrup was fixed he handed it over to his half-brother. "It's cool enough now. Just reattach it to the saddle. Look at the other one too, just in case that's worn as well." The prince took the stirrup and nodded slowly. Then he looked up at him. "Thank you," he all but whispered, before slipping out. Just as he passed through the door Gendry heard him whisper, "Why couldn't he be my brother?" Damn it, did the lad hate Joffrey that much? Perhaps he did. Poor boy. Shireen had told him about how much Joffrey seemed to bully his brother and sister. He sighed as he pulled out the helmet again. All it needed was a bit more work on the neck guard, and as he labored over it he thought about his life. Everything had changed in some very strange ways. He was in danger, that much he knew at least. His very existence was a threat to someone, but he didn't know how or why. All he did know was that he needed to check everything about his own riding tackle every morning. Perhaps Winterfell would see an end to the need to constantly look over his shoulder. Well. He looked down at the helmet. It was ready. He felt as if a host of butterflies were loose in his stomach, but he'd told his father that once it was made he would give it to him. First things first though, he had to shut the forge up and put the tools away. The risk of fire was too great to risk it though. It took time, but he was satisfied when he closed the door and looked about cautiously. No sense taking risks. He didn't exactly skulk across the courtyard, he would never really know how to without looking like an idiot, but he did look about more than he would have normally. A man was shouting somewhere at the main gateway, but apart from that it was quiet. Judging by the hour he knew who would be guarding his father, and as he strode down the corridor he saw the welcoming sight of Sir Barristan Selmy standing there. The old knight smiled a little as he saw Gendry and then nodded a little. "Is it ready?" "Aye." Is his grace free?" "He's reading some reports that came in from White Harbour." "Wait here a moment, lad." And with that he knocked lightly on the door, waited for the bark of come, and then slipped in. There was a rumble of voices and then he returned. "In you go." As he shuffled in, Sir Barristan just behind him, he could see that his father was standing by the fireplace, where a small fire was burning. He was wearing a shirt and breeches, both of which seemed to not fit him as well as they should, and he was scowling at a message in one hand. Stormbreaker was propped up in one corner of the room and there was also a set of iron weights on the table. Father was driving himself hard, everyone said the same thing, trying to return to the fitness of the past. "Gendry," Father said as he finally looked up. "Sir Barristan said that you wanted to see me." "What's amiss?" "Nothing's amiss," he muttered as he strode forwards, and then he brought out the helmet. "It's ready." "Your Grace." "I mean, Father." "Your Grace, Father." He was babbling, because by all the gods he was nervous. His father reached out slowly and took the helmet from his trembling grasp. "Oh my!" A finger traced the lines that he had so carefully etched onto it. It was hard to make a helmet that looked like a stag's face without giving it a muzzle that restricted some aspects of sight, but he had managed it. Long hours he'd spent on it, as well as puzzling over the horns. Too much metal would make it too heavy, so he'd combined metal and actual antlers. It was practical but also a symbol of the Stag King. "Gendry, this is magnificent." He tilted his head from one side to another. "I hope it fits." The padding was a trial at times, I didn't want it chafing, and his father cut him off by putting it on and then adjusting the straps, before closing the visor and then twisting his head from side to side. Blue eyes twinkled at him through the eye-slits. "What do you think, Sir Barristan?" "Formidable, Your Grace." "And practical." "Aye." His father pulled it off, restored his tousled hair with a swipe of the hand and then grinned at him. "Thank you, Gendry. A worthy gift." He stared at his feet. "Given time I could make it better, make you a better one that is, but Lad, it's magnificent. You're young, anything after this will be a bonus." He placed a large hand on his shoulder. "I know that it hasn't been an easy trip for you. Stannis and Ser Jorah have told me of matters." He seemed to be about to add something when a fist thudded against the door. "Your Grace," drawled the voice of the Kingslayer, "the Lord Hand is here with a man of the Night's Watch. They wish to speak with you." For a moment he wanted to run away. The Kingslayer was languid, cynical, sarcastic and above all dangerous. Everything about him seemed to proclaim that to Gendry, from the way he laid a hand nonchalantly on his sword, to the way that he looked at Gendry as if he was dog shit on the bottom of his boot. "Enter," Father boomed, gesturing to Gendry to step back a little as he placed the helmet on the table. The Kingslayer opened the door and then waited for Stannis and a tall man dressed in black to enter. The stranger was travel-stained and held a satchel in his hand. He bowed respectfully to Father and then looked at Stannis. "A messenger from Castle Black," his uncle said, looking strained if such a thing was possible. "He has a delivery from Lord Commander Mormont." "Robert." "Your Grace, it's unsettling to say the least." The Kingslayer, who had closed the door behind him, smirked. "Is it a snook, or perhaps a grumpkin?" The man of the Night's Watch turned and glared at him. "A lesser Lannister," he grunted, before placing the satchel on the table and reaching within it. "Your Grace, I am Galbert Snow of the Night's Watch, he said hoarsely. Lord Commander sent this to you. It shows what we are facing. You must prepare yourself. And with that he placed a cloth-covered shape in front of Father. Father stared at the man in front of him and then at the shape. What's that? Galbert Snow took a step back. I would not have anyone say that it is any kind of trick. We found it north of the wall. View it, but don't try and touch it. Your Grace, dark things walk under the sun north of the wall. Dread cooled in Gendry's stomach, like icy porridge, and he stared at the cloth and whatever was beneath it. His father felt it too. You've seen it already, Stannis. I have. Stannis swallowed awkwardly and then seemed to collect himself. You must too. His father reached out and pulled the cloth off. Under it was a small cage that contained a severed head. The head of a man not long dead. Gendry winced a little, before pausing. Something didn't feel right about this. He just had no idea what. And then the eyes of the head opened, blue and bright and terrible, and the mouth opened and closed as it tried to bite the air. Muscles moved and bunched at the jaw and temples, and the forehead wrinkled as whatever this foul thing was tried to will itself to attack them. Sir Barristan let out a curse of such intensity that he was surprised, whilst Gendry found himself flinching backwards. As for the Kingslayer, he narrowed his eyes and laid a hand on his sword, before seeming to pause and then just stare at it. As for Father, yes, he jerked back briefly with surprise, before collecting himself and then leaning forwards to examine the dreadful thing carefully. This is the head of a white. Your Grace, Snow said hoarsely. It is. They've been seen. They've been cut to pieces. We're sending examples south, to show what we face. Then the call was sent true. The others have returned. They have, Your Grace. The Kingslayer scoffed. But the others are just a legend, surely. What is this, really? A trick? Where are the wires? Snow whirled around and curled a lip at the Kingslayer. You know nothing of this. It's no trick, it's what we face. It's why we need help. He turned to Father. They are coming, Your Grace. Father stared at the severed head, which was still glaring around as much as it was able to. The old enemy, as Ned once said to me when he talked about the old legends. A silence fell, one that Gendry finally had to fill. That cage, he said in a rush. What's it made from? I don't recognize the metal. You have a good eye, lad, Snow replied. We don't know. It was found in a place called the Overlook by the first Ranger, Benjen Stark, along with other such cages. All we know is that the first men made them somehow. They slow the rot down, so that proof of what we face can be taken south. Do you have more of them then? Stannis barked. We have, my lord, and the man of the Night's Watch nodded. And yet more were found, or so I heard when I sailed south. More have or will be going south. To all the major lords and also King's Landing. This got a belly-rumbling laugh from Father. Gods, I'd like to see what Pycelle or Varys say about something like this. Probably piss themselves and then deny that it happened. It was only then that Gendry noticed something that everyone else had not. Stormbreaker was humming slightly and the White was snarling at it. Chapter 31. Chapter text. Apologies for the delay on this. Willers. He scratched his head, stared at the map and then leant back. He just couldn't put his finger on what was wrong. The Reach was the most fertile part of Westeros, but it just wasn't quite as fertile as it once had been, once you looked at the oldest of records. The fall in production was a small one, but a cumulative one. And it seemed to follow a long, very slow pattern. He just wasn't sure why or when. He sighed. Was this it? Was this the way that he had to make the garden bloom again? Prophecy, or whatever this was, gave him the creeping horrors at times. Why couldn't life ever be simple? Well, perhaps young Sam Tarly would be able to find the same pattern and then perhaps even some answers. Perhaps even an idea about just what the right question was. He grunted in exasperation and then looked at the list of things to do. One thing was to go to King's Landing and have a word with Jon Arryn about just what in the Seven Hells was going on. Or, if he was back by then, the king. Or his hand. There was not the slightest chance of them coming to him, so he would have to go to them. A pile of letters to one side caught his attention for a moment as a slight draft stirred them and he sighed a little. Procrastination would only take him so far. The healing of his leg had had just that one drawback so far. Boots thumped on flagstones in the corridor and after a moment he realized that he was being observed. Looking up he smiled as soon as he saw the man in the doorway. Garland. He stood up and strode over, noticing how his younger brother watched him walk with a wry astonishment. Strange to see you walk without a cane or without a limp. Garland grinned as they embraced. I wanted to return to Highgarden as soon as I heard, but your raven was very clear that I had to continue my task of inspecting the sea defenses. And how are they? Willers asked as they returned to his desk and sat on opposite sides of it. The last word from the Iron Islands is that Balon Greyjoy was at daggers drawn with the reader. With the Iron Islands a tinderbox of unrest, it's only a matter of time before some minor idiot takes it on himself to go a-reaving off our coastline. Garland nodded somberly. The defences at the Shield Islands are adequate, but can be easily strengthened. Lord Chester bent my ear several times about the need to take the Ironborn more seriously. He fell silent for a long moment. The islands and the coast are all abuzz with word of the call. Many people are speaking of sending help to Ned Stark and the Wall. Willers. I am glad that you have taken over command of the Reach here. I dearly love Father but, well, many have alluded to him being, rather boastful for the wrong reasons. Willers nodded slowly. The more I delve into what needs to be done to keep the Reach running, the more I discover that Father was never as good at it as he said he was. And he's now on a long hunting trip. I heard some strange tales about it. He is. He paused and then pointed at Otherbane. It rejected him. His words made Garland stare quizzically at him. What? It's Otherbane. The spear of the Gardener Kings. The Talis had it, without really knowing about it, and when Father tried to take it off him it rejected him. It burned his hand a little. And that was when he went off on his hunting trip. His brother stared at the spear, then at Willers, before staring back at the spear again. How can a spear reject someone? Willers shrugged. I don't know. Magic of some kind. The call was heard. I found that statue of Garth Greenhand, my leg was healed. Why should we not think that we should see magic with this? He fell silent for a long moment as he looked at it. It was the weapon of the Gardener Kings for centuries, Garland. The Florents and the Hightowers looked for it after the Field of Fire. And now it's mine. I don't mind telling you that I have a feeling that something is coming. You're not the only one, Garland muttered. I feel the same. And there's something odd happening in Old Town. Lord Hightower is apparently being even more reclusive than he normally is. Something odd is going on there, at the base of that tower of his. Old Town is buzzing that something's wrong and that the Maesters have been consulted about whatever it is. In addition, now it was Garland's turn to pause. In addition, there has been talk of the Starry September becoming more active. Willers eyed his brother carefully. Active? How active? Taking more of part in spiritual matters was the way that one Septon described it. Another more cynical one said that the faith militant is raising its head a little and that it needs a leader who can benefit from its increased profile. He stared at his brother owlishly. Absolute rubbish, he sighed. That said, the latest news is that the faith militant has been squashed flat in the Crownlands and the Riverlands, so it's only logical that the Zealots would try and make mischief in the Reach as well. So, the Septon of the Starry September is going to try and do something, is he? Where? Rumor has it that he's seeking a cause to champion. He suddenly had a slight headache, something that often happened when religious matters became complicated. It's still Septon Alliston there, isn't it? Yes. He's still a pompous little imbecile puffed up with his own importance, isn't he? A perfect description. About as subtle as a peacock, and as cunning as a battering ram. I'm surprised he hasn't written to you yet. The letter is probably on its way. My thanks for the warning, I'll treat it as it deserves. Welcome back. Is Leonette with you? She'll be here in a few hours or so. He turned a little pink. We need to consult a Maester. We think that she might be with child. Now this was excellent news and he beamed at his brother. Wonderful. I hope that it is true. Let me know the moment that the master confirms it. And then we need to work on something else. He gestured at the pile of letters. Behold. Garland peered at the letters, confused. What are they? Well, you know, it's the strangest thing. The moment that word spread that my leg was healed and later that I hold other bane, the lords of the Reach suddenly remembered that I exist and started sending in marriage proposals. I have daughters and sisters of lords in every size, age and shape being dangled before me. Grandmother keeps me in stitches with her comments about some of the offers. Laughter rang through the room as his brother threw his head back with mirth. Oh, this should be entertaining. Shall we discuss them over dinner? We shall indeed. Grandmother will be, as will Margary. Laura's too. Garland winced a little. Ah, Laura's. Is he still demanding to go back to King's Landing? He nodded, sobering a little. He is. I still say no. That plan that he and father were concocting with Renly Baratheon, folly. A somber nod greeted his words, followed by a sideways look. Laura's has always been, close to Renly and... He raised a hand to silence Garland with a weary gesture. I know. The fact is that we need to secure House Tyrell on a more secure foundation. Many are eyeing other bane and muttering that we are not the Gardeners and that our claim to Highgarden is not as strong as theirs. Therefore I need to marry, and soon. So does Laura's. As for Margary, we need to find her an adequate match. Given her age and what has been happening of late, I plan to write to Ned Stark and offer her as wife to his oldest son, Robert. Garland's eyebrows rose for a moment, before falling as he thought this through. Clever, he said eventually. It would ally the Reach strongly to the north at a time when this call is reshaping so much. Not bad, said a voice to one side, and they looked over to see that grandmother had somehow noiselessly appeared at one of the windows. She looked at them both, sniffed hard and then nodded. Yes, you'll do. You're both already thinking more clearly than your idiot father. And with that she hobbled off. Willers sent his brother a wry smile. We still have so much to learn from her. Cat. She missed Ned. He'd been away for weeks now and she missed him fiercely. She was already starting to feel some of the familiar sensations around being pregnant, and that was starting to make things a little worse. That said, she was also enjoying the way that life had changed recently. Daisy Sherestone had taken Sansa under her wing a little and was educating her about the history of the North. Her daughter seemed to be learning a great deal, or at least that was what she surmised by the expression on Sansa's face at times. Ned had been right, their daughter had had a lot of nonsense in her head. She blamed herself as well as Septa Mordane. Both had meant well, but both had reinforced Sansa's naivety. There were times when Arya had more realism in her head than Sansa, but that balance was now shifting. Thank the gods for Daisy Sherestone and, in a terrible way, Robb's memories of the future that would now never be. For one thing, Lady would not now be killed by Ned near the Trident. She shuddered a little at that. The direwolf was growing like a weed and followed Sansa everywhere, watching with tilted head and intent eyes. Sansa adored her, as did Domeric, whom the direwolf also liked. Thinking of the direwolves made her think of Arya and her warging abilities, which made her shudder. However, she had made a promise to her daughter and she would keep that promise. Arya could keep at it and even advise Bran. She didn't know what Ned would think of it all when he came back, and she prayed that he would be back soon. Winterfell was changing a little, or so it seemed. Parties of men and women were on the move, passing north or returning south. The wall was on the lips of most, along with the need to send help to the Stark in Winterfell. Party after party came and went from all over Westeros. There was always more arriving, sometimes for the oddest of reasons. One such example had been the small group of miners from the Westerlands who had arrived 10 days previously and who were now prospecting for metals in the hills to the north of Winterfell. One had said that he had a nose for iron and silver, and a message had come back from him saying that he just might have found some potential veins to be worked. The north waxed. But for the most terrible of reasons. A storm was coming. She sighed, and then she caught sight of Jory Castle walking arm in arm with his wife, smiling at each other and then at the running forms of the terrible threesome. The Castles looked over them with a great deal of long-suffering amusement. That said, they also kept them in check. A horn blew, high and pure and far off, and she turned to the main gate with a frown. It couldn't be the king, not yet, nor could it be Ned and the others. Voices shouted at the gate, and then she saw Jory's uncle stride towards her, a frown on his face. A party bearing banners, my lady. Many banners, from all the houses of the north. House Stark amongst them. She felt her eyebrows go up at this and then down again. Ah! Damn it, she had hoped that Ned would be back for this by now. Admit them, Sir Roderick, if you would. And send Bran to me. Brown eyes met hers for a moment, and then he bent his head in a deep nod. Aye, my lady. As the gates opened fully, she stood there, as straight as a poker, awaiting the arrival of the leaders of the Company of the Rose. After a moment Bran ran up to her, with Edric and Robert next to him, along with Bran's direwolf. All three boys looked curiously at her. Bran, the leaders of the Company of the Rose have arrived. As you are the Stark in Winterfell, you need to be here to greet them. She looked him over and repressed a sigh. His knees were dusty and there was dirt smudged on his nose, but he didn't look quite as bad as the other two, who were belatedly brushing themselves off. She looked at the gates, applied her handkerchief to her son quickly and then straightened again. The men and women who rode through the gates had the looks of people who had been kissed by the sun. They also looked as if they were all repressing their emotions as severely as they were capable of. Eyes flickered about the courtyard, almost as if they were still astonished that they were here. They were led by a man who bore the look of Ned a little. The hair color was there, and the chin and nose. The intense look was there as well, although the slight shake to his hands as he dismounted spoke of his true feelings. A group of the men and women formed up behind the man, who then strode forwards and stopped before Cat and the children. And then they all went down on one knee. Lady Stark, Lord Brandon, I am Edric Stark, leader of what was once the Company of the Rose. I know that Lord Stark is at Castle Black, but we are here to pledge our swords to Winterfell and the North, because we heard the call. Long years have we been in exile, but the call has brought us back across the narrow sea. We have heard it, we are here. She looked at the faces that were all now fixed on her, those intent faces, before stepping forwards. Lord Edric, the word of your coming came some days ago. You will have to wait a while to talk to Lord Stark in order to have word on what he will ask of you, but I can say this now: welcome back from the long exile that your families have been on for so many years. Thank you for answering the call to Winterfell. There is much to do. The men and women before her bowed their heads and then they stood. Some were now openly in tears and she averted her eyes for a moment, until Bran turned to her and hissed, Mother, have you seen their banners? No, why? He jerked his head at a knot of banners. Red Starks, Dustins and Riders. Does father know? She stared and then repressed some words that everyone would probably be shocked that she knew. Oh, this would be a pretty mess for Ned to untangle. Kevan. Tywine was standing at the window staring. At the stone garden, he thought, perhaps. It was hard to tell from his standpoint and he did not want to say anything to interrupt his brother. The arrival and later departure of Randyll Tarly had been the event that had caused this latest crisis. The last time that he had seen Tywine like this had been after the news of the deaths of Rickard and Brandon Stark, the moment that Tywine had seen the last shreds of his loyalty to his old friend Aerys Targaryen stretch and fray and snap. He'd spent hours staring out of the window then, deep in thought, and he was doing exactly the same thing now. Whatever Tywine was staring at now, it had caused a massive frown to spread over his face. Kevan winced and then took a quiet step into the room. Ah! The green man could be seen in the distance, tending the heart tree. Something was odd about that tree. No one had ever seen the green man working on it, but a face seemed to be appearing on its trunk. Randyll Tarly is not the kind of man to act on a whim, Tywine said eventually. Nor is he a man who believes in snooks and grumpkins. Or so I thought. He's a man of practicality, but he brought the weapon of the Gardener Kings to Willers Tyrell, which enabled him to all but depose his fool of a father. And then Tarly sailed for Winterfell with orders to find out how to fight legends. Myths. Unable to work out if he should just nod or say yes out loud, Kevan eventually settled for saying, I. The word brought him another silence, an interminable one that stretched out and out. And yet there is a myth in the stone garden, Kevan eventually said, greatly daring. Tending the heart tree. He's not a myth, he's a man. He's a green man. When was the last time they left the Isle of Faces and walked the Seven Kingdoms? Yet another silence. Tywin's face was smooth now, the frown gone, but he could almost hear his brother's mind working. Again, he wanted to say something, but he dared not. He sensed that it would not be welcome, but also he sensed that something else was happening here, that everything was balanced suddenly on the blade of a sword. The slightest thing could tip things one way or the other. He knew that there was a growing tide of worry in the Westerlands. The Westerlings, who were one of the most ancient houses in the region, were said to be sending Reynold Westerling to the north, and the Farmans were said to be sending aid to the wall. And everyone was watching Casterly Rock. On and on that silence stretched. Finally Kevan's patience snapped. Tywin, I can go to Winterfell on your behalf. Tyrion's reports are all very well, but if you do not trust him enough to make a decision on sending help to Stark and the Night's Watch, then send me and... No, Tywin bit the word off as if it pained him. And then just before Kevan exploded he added, we will both go to Winterfell. I will have the truth of this. The balance had shifted. Ned. His orders had gone out and now it was time to ride. They had a long way to go and not a lot of time, and he hoped that everything would go as he hoped, no, planned, when he met Robert. But before they left Castle Black there had been two important meetings. The first had come when Sir Alliser Thorne had barged into his room, closed the door very firmly and then folded his arms and glared at him. Your bastard has a Valyrian steel sword. Why? He stared coolly at the man. I did not give him that sword, another did. Who? Why not ask him? Because he's not the Lord of the North, he's just a boy. Where did he get the sword from? Who is his mother? Who is he? Ned had thought long and hard for a moment. And what business is it of yours? He has a Valyrian steel sword that kills others and their whites. And your brother once told me that he thought there was a chance that the boy might join the Night's Watch. Ned had looked at him. And what do you care of my son? Thorne had then looked intensely uncomfortable. I am the master at arms of Castle Black. It's my job to train the men here, to make sure that they survive what's coming here, and we both know what's fucking coming here. That boy can fight, by all the gods, can he fight? Will he join the Watch? A pause had fallen. You dislike him because he's my son, don't you? I shouldn't, but... Seven hells, you helped send me into exile here at the Wall, because I was a loyalist. But thanks to you the Night's Watch is finally getting the help that we've been begging for years. The castles on the Wall are being restored, we know what's coming, we know that whatever happens we're not alone. Thorne's face had twisted into some strange expression that combined anger with gratefulness. Ned had looked at him and then sighed and made his decision. Only 3 other people here at the Wall know what I am about to tell you, he had said in a very low voice. And I am only telling you so that you stop asking about that bloody sword. Maester Aemon gave it to him, and Aemon in turn had it from Brynden Rivers, before he vanished. Given that the sword could only have been Dark Sister, Thorne had turned a very funny color at that news, before Ned continued, you were a loyalist. This is something that must be kept a secret. I am not Jon's father, I am his uncle. His mother was my sister. Now think all of that through. Thorne had sank into the nearest chair, his face as white as a sheet and his hands trembling. Then, he is. I mean, some might say that. He is in danger of being murdered by a great many people if his true parentage ever comes out. Does he know? He does. Wants nothing more than a normal life. Wants to live, marry, have a holdfast and found a cadet branch of the Starks that is loyal to Winterfell. He does not want that poisoned chair of metal. And should, by some evil chance, a day come that he has to flee to the Wall and take the Black because it's that or death, there must be those who know why. Aemon knows, as do Benjen and the Lord Commander. Thorne had thought all of that through, before running a shaking hand through his hair and then laughing softly. Gods above! What am I to do with my hate now, Lord Stark? Hatred of you and Baratheon has been the only thing at times to keep my heart warm enough to live up here. And now I hear that you kept alive the grandson of your worst enemy. You're more honorable than most men I know of. His eyes had become hunted for a moment and had then relaxed a little. Very well, I know why this has to be kept a secret. Keep him alive, Lord Stark. That boy can fight. And then he had left. The second meeting had been with Tyrion Lannister, a man whom everyone had thought had been dead for years. The arrival of Tywin Lannister's brother, along with his son, had been a shock, especially after he had taken Ned to one side into a room and very firmly shut the door. "I am not my brother," he had said at once. "I am not as ruthless, nor am I as prideful and inflexible. I listen. I have to. I lost an eye and almost died because I let my obsession with Brightraw get the better of my good judgment. And I have some green sight. Not as much as my son, but enough to know that your eldest son is the boy who died and fell through time. Do not worry, the secret is safe with me. I know that the old gods have spoken, and I know that strange things are on the wind. I have faced them and killed them for a start. I know what's coming. And I am not my brother. You can rely on me and my son. Tyrion too, he's a lot cleverer than his father ever could be. Oh, and that young apprentice Maester, the one that keeps vanishing into the background. Her real name is Sarilla. She's one of the Sand Snakes, the daughters of Oberyn Martell. I think that her father sent her up here to find out what's going on. Make of that what you will. Not that I told you of that. If he had any more meetings like that, then his hair was going to start standing on end with shock." The gates creaked open to the south and he looked back at the disparate company behind him. Robb, Jon and Theon were behind a picked handful of Stark guards, with the Lannisters in a knot to one side. Then there was Mance Rayder and his good sister, along with 2 guards from the Free Folk. That included that red-headed girl, the Magna of the Thans, who he needed Robert to talk to, some Than guards, Gia Mormont, who also needed to talk to Robert, and finally Alras. He needed to talk to the latter at some point. He stood up on his stirrups and gestured at the road ahead. Ride. Bloody hell, this was going to be fastest he'd traveled since after the Trident. Sarilla. When she returned to Sunspear, or more likely the Water Gardens, she would have to have a little word with her father and her uncle about Ned Stark and how fast he could move. She'd wondered a bit about the ravens that had been coming and going from Castle Black. As they thundered down the road south, she realized with a start that Lord Stark was going to drive them on a brutal pace. They galloped for a long time, and just as she was starting to think that they were going to exhaust the horses, she saw the first way station ahead, or that was what Lord Stark called it. As they each transferred from a blowing horse to a fresh one, she realized that it was going to be a long day of hard riding ahead. It was. They swapped horse for horse, they rode and rode, Lord Stark with his direwolf loping effortless by his side. Every now and then she would vanish into the woods to each side and return with a blooded muzzle, so she was keeping herself well fed. The humans in the party fell upon their meal at noon with gusto, amid much muttering at the pace, but none complained when Lord Stark kept up the same pace in the afternoon. Way station to way station, mile after mile southwards. Ned Stark was a man that father would have to respect. He moved at a pace that would make even father worry. And on they went. As they rode, he heard snatches of conversation from the others. The gift, they said, and then later the new gift, was truly coming back to life. Fields were being tilled, cottages inhabited, mills repaired, firewood collected. The North prepared. They slept that night in an old holdfast just south of the southern border of the new gift, and as she slumped into her blankets she made a note to observe the others very carefully when she awoke. She needed to. When the call to wake came in the morning, she ached in all kinds of places, but she made a point of watching the men and how they moved. Men were men, and men complained about their balls a lot after a lot of riding. They walked a bit differently too, and she made sure that she moved and grunted and grumbled the same way. Tyrion Lannister of course eyed her movements with a small smile, whilst Tyrion Lannister, well, he was not looking at her at all, or trying not to. Not that she cared. No. Well, maybe. He had nice eyes. Not that she could stare at him. Others might think oddly of her, thinking as they did that she was a he. The second day was just as hard as the first, way station to way station, blown horse to fresh horse, galloping endlessly. The third day found them in the woods north of the Long Lake, and she realized dazedly that they were moving at a truly brutal pace. She was in pain now, a lot of jolted pain through every limb, every muscle. Fortunately at the top of the Long Lake they embarked onto a ship, which meant that they could rest. Tyrion Lannister had a liniment that was in great demand, and she could tell that the wildlings were especially exhausted. There couldn't be many horses, real horses, north of the wall, and she could tell that the poor bastards were not used to such riding. She also noted that Robb and John Stark were quite solicitous to the women, even if they were aware of the odd roll of the eyes from them and, when the Starks' backs were turned, the burning gazes. Father would have laughed his head off at everything. As they sailed south, everyone relaxed and slept a lot, even the direwolves. She napped briefly and then she woke up and started to sketch what she had seen on some parchments. This was important, she had to draw what she had seen. The wall. The black gate. Whites. And, the others. That had been a fight that she had felt for quite time afterwards. Never had she felt such shame at being unable to fight as hard as she knew she could, because she didn't have anything apart from her daggers. Lovely weapons, well balanced and easy to use. Also useless against whites. And the others. All she could do was stand there and then hamstring any passing limbs. For a sand snake it had been humiliating. She had started with some charcoal sketches and then inked over the final ones. The night fort. The wall. One of the whites. And the other that had come closest to her. It still haunted her, that creature. The whites, well, she'd seen dead bodies before. A moving dead body had been horrible, but she could live with that. The other though. The way that it moved had been inhuman, the way that it had looked at her and the others, as if they were nothing but fly specks. Father needed to see these. Father needed to understand what was coming. She stared at the sketch. Was it good enough? Would Father believe her tale, of all that she had seen? Would Uncle Doran? She sighed and then stared at the trees that were on the banks of the lake in the distance. The ship was moving faster than it had earlier, thanks to Geryon Lannister having a word with the captain and then resetting the sails a little. Not bad, said a voice behind her, and she jumped a little before repressing a curse. Quite a good likeness. It was Lord Stark himself, who sat down next to her. Geryon Lannister had a word with me back at the wall. About who you really are. Ah, shit. She had been afraid of that. I am Sarala Sand, she replied in a low voice. Daughter of the Red Viper. Please keep it to yourself, Lord Stark, at least until Winterfell. He nodded, before leaning a little closer. Why are you here in the north? My father sent me. Lord Dane came to see my uncle at the Water Gardens, where he met my father as well. He said that he was headed north, to King's Landing first to get his son, and then Winterfell, to answer the call. He knew that he was dying, but he had to go and he bore the sword Dawn. Lord Stark stared at him in some shock for a moment, before closing his eyes for a long moment. Now that's a sword I know all too well. I remember Lord Dane vaguely from the tourney at Harrenhal, but he was not at Starfall when I left Dawn with his sister. He seemed to think deeply. Did he say if his son was the new sword of the morning? I don't know. Perhaps. Father just said that things were moving that he did not understand. The Stony Dornish are sending what they can to the wall, but they cannot explain why, or at least Father did not understand. Combined with the fact that the glass candles in the citadel can be lit again, well, I ended up on the fastest ship I could find. Lord Stark absorbed this and then nodded slightly. All help is appreciated. Now that you have seen what lies beyond the wall, what will your father do? Dawn and the North are not exactly close after the rebellion. She sighed. Father bears no ill will to you or the North. In fact, he respects you for doing what you did for your sister and your murdered family. He understands the importance of family. But he and my uncle need to know what lies behind this all, why the Stony Dornish are coming north, what the call is. I was sent to the north to find out information. That is all. The Warden of the North stared at her and then again at the sketches. Then these are important. Talk to Mance Rayder, he's a fine sketcher, or so I am told. The more you can tell Sunspear the better. And at Winterfell you can talk to quite a few people. King Robert will be there. Aye, he will. Lord Stannis, his hand, as well. And with that Lord Stark stood, nodded and strode off to the other side of the boat, where he sat next to the huge form of his sleeping direwolf and then fall asleep himself. They sailed on, through the night and most of the day, until they reached the southernmost part of the lake, where a jetty was waiting and what looked like the start of a large village constructed from stone and wood. There were fresh horses there and she didn't have to suppress a wince as she mounted, along with the others, and then started down the road that had been laid through the Wolf's Wood. Straight west they galloped, heading for the King's Road, changing horses at waypoints again and again. Day merged into day, sleep taken at waypoints or holdfasts along their path, the sleep of exhaustion and not a little pain. The direwolves seemed to be holding out the best, with the 3 Starks and the Greyjoy boy taking care of theirs, but there were drawn faces on all the men and women by then. One day she heard Mance Rayder sigh to the other wildlings, "We'll all be proud to look back on this trip and say that we were there on Ned Stark's great ride, south from Castle Black. By then we'll have forgotten the bloody pain it cost us all." And then he'd frowned and started humming snatches, and it was then she suspected that he'd started to make up a song about it all. On they rode, with Tyrion Lannister's liniment all but running out, until eventually they crested a rise on the King's Road and saw, on the horizon, the tips of the towers of Winterfell. At last Lord Stark said with what was half a sigh and half a laugh, before spurring his horse on again. "Winterfell. Brynden." The twins loomed ahead of their party and he suppressed a sigh. He remembered Walder Bloody Free all too well. Hoster had called him the late Lord Free because of his tardiness before the Ruby Ford, and all knew that the old bastard had never forgiven his brother for the all-too-true taunt. And now they were approaching the place where he squatted, like an ancient weasel on a bulky chair. At least the party was not flying Tully colours that would get them admitted, albeit reluctantly but with an audience with Walder Free sneering at them all. Instead they rode behind the banner of a white tree with red leaves on a green background, the banner of the Green Men. It was a banner that had not been seen for many years, and it seemed to cause no small amount of confusion as they waited in the rain by the gate by the southern side of the twins. He'd raised his hood like they all had, and as the rain dripped off the brim in front of his face he hoped that it would hide his identity. After what felt like an age the gates finally creaked open and they rode in to discover a small group of men waiting for them. Some were guards, but he recognized the leading man. Sir Stephen Free looked older and little more careworn than the last time he had seen him, but the heir to the twins was still straight of back and sharp of eye, because he recognized him at once. "Sir Brynden." He looked over the party in some confusion. "I did not know that you were with this party." The guards did not recognize the strange banner. "We are traveling to the north, from the Isle of Faces," he replied. The Green Man was hanging back in the party, seeming to look around with a combination of interest and what might have been sadness. "The Green Men are abroad again." A gesture at the men and women around him got some short sharp nods directed to Sir Stephen. This information caused the eyes of the eldest son of Walder Free to widen for a moment, before flickering slightly with thought. "Ah. Green Men. From the Isle of Faces. There are strange tales about that place." "There will be more tales. The Green Men have answered the call." A man in the distinctive leather cap that the phrase seemed to favor had emerged from a side door and was approaching to one side. "Lord Free wants to see them," he barked at Sir Stephen, who stiffened a little and then fixed the other man with a look of carefully hidden contempt. "He wants to know who rides under such an unknown banner." Sir Stephen smiled a slightly pained smile. "It seems that you will have to talk to my lord father." Brynden nodded shortly and then dismounted, leading the others. As they secured their horses in the stables he jerked his head at Brian. "Stay close to me in there," he muttered. "It's going to be unpleasant." She frowned, confused. "You expect treachery?" "No," he replied in a low voice pitched at her ear only, "I expect discourtesy. Walder Free is close to his 90th year and is unpleasant, sarcastic, rude and prickly to any slight, real or imagined, to his family. You are a woman in armor. He will cast aspersions like petals on the wind. Be prepared." Brian stiffened a little. "I shall," she replied. "Thank you for the warning." He looked at her and then nodded. The great hall of the twins was just as he remembered it to be, large, dark, gloomy and full of weasels. At the head of the room was a table, and at that table, sitting in a huge chair with tower carvings, was Walder Free, who looked as if he was about to drop dead from old age. There was a goblet of wine in one hand and his eyes darted from side to side, as if he expected assassins to sneak out from the shadows. The moment that he laid eyes on Brynden he sat up and glared at him. "The Blackfish. What are you doing, riding under such a strange banner?" "Father," Sir Stephen started to say, "they claim to be from Did I give you permission to speak? I asked the blackfish over there. As Sir Stephen was about to tell you, we are riding from the Isle of Faces. Under the banner of the Green Men. There was a muttering from the assemblage of weasels, but Walder Free just sat there, his pale face working slightly as he looked at the blackfish and the others, and then he threw back his face and let out a toothless bray of laughter. Ah, he said eventually, Blackfish, you do amuse me. Does Lord Tully know that his renegade brother has gone mad? Green men abroad indeed, naught but lies and legends. They do not leave their island. It was fortunate that the other green men had been warned by him earlier, as otherwise they would have bristled a great deal. As it was, Lord Free was glared at quite a bit. Not that he cared. The green men are neither lie nor legend, Lord Free said, a voice behind him, as the green man stepped forwards. Something flashed through the air, a coin, no, a token that landed heavily on the table in front of Walder Free. The token for our passage. As was agreed many years ago. The Lord of the Crossing reached out with a slightly palsied hand and picked it up. The moment he saw what was on it he paled and then thrust it away from him. No, he said after a long moment. That's not possible. That token, my father told me about it, but no. The green men do not leave their island. And with that he shoved the token away. Brindon sighed and sensed that Brian was stirring irritably next to him. This drew the attention of Walder Free, who openly looked her up and down before smirking obscenely at him. Our Blackfish, finally settled down, have you? Look at her, ugly as a fishwife. You should have come to me instead, I could have found a granddaughter of mine. If you like them, young that is. The horrible old man cackled at his own words, with some of his progeny joining in, whilst others, such as Sir Stephen, closed their eyes and winced. Brindon grabbed his temper by the scruff of its neck and stuffed it back inside him, but something must have shown on his face given the fact that Walder Free paled a little. As for Brian, she tilted her head back a little and looked down her nose at the Lord of the Crossing as if he was nothing more than Slug. So this is what House Free has become. In thrall to a laughing dotard who thinks that he's being funny by being discourteous to his guests. The green man took a long step forwards, and it might have been Brindon's imagination, but for a long moment the candles and the fires seemed to burn lower. Your father would have been ashamed of you. Walder Free squinted at the green man. And who in the seven hells are you, hum? You're old and tall and you claim you knew my father. He spat wetly to one side. I see that the blackfish has gathered a company of fools around him. And who are you? The green man. The old man at the table gaped for a second, before laughing wheezily. Liar. They don't leave their fool island. Who are you really? Large hands pulled the hood up, so that the antlers came into view. The green man. Yes, I knew your father. I remember the first time I laid eyes on you. I wasn't impressed. I think that I wanted to throw you down the nearest well. It was at the marriage of your sister to Lord Ambrose Butterwell at White Walls. A silence fell. Walder Free was staring at the green man, staring at him as if he did not know who or what he was. Impossible, he quavered. That was more than 80 years ago. I am the green man, came the implacable reply. The years touch me a bit differently from you. I remember you. Snotty-nosed, rude and dirty. He sniffed in disgust. Nothing really changes, does it? Walder Free was almost cowering in his chair. Who are you? The hood came back down. I was once Sir Duncan the Tall. There was an astounded silence, and then a combination of muttering, laughter and shocked comments filled the air. Stephen Free was staring at the green man with a look that combined shock with hope for some reason. Impossible, Walder Free mumbled. You're dead. Dead since Summer Hall. Died in the fire there. Dead. I was burnt, but I lived. The green man unrolled his sleeve and showed the horrific burns on his arm. Silence fell again. Walder Free swallowed thickly, and then, just as he seemed to be rallying a bit, there was a hammering at the doors to one side and a guard slipped in, escorting a man dressed in black. Brindon blinked. He knew that man. My lord, quavered the guard, your pardon, but this man of the Night's Watch arrived on the north side of the Twins. He demands to speak to you at once. Damn it. Walder Free roared weakly. Night's Watch do not demand anything of me. What do you want, Black Crow? Men. Coin. Food. You'll have nothing from me, not with this call nonsense roiling the small folk. Brindon glanced at the bloody man dismissively and then stepped forwards. Yoren, isn't it? I've seen you at the bloody gate many times. The man in black smiled and nodded at him before stepping almost formally up to the table. Lord Frey, I am Yoren of the Night's Watch. I am sorry for disturbing you at this moment, but I was charged by the Lord Commander with showing as many lords as possible this. And with that he placed a cloth-covered square on the table, before backing away. Proof, my lord. Proof of what we at the wall will be facing. The head of a white. A suzerain again. The word lie was in the air. But all eyes were on Walder Frey. He was sitting in his chair, a shrunken husk of a man whose eyes were darting between the green man, Brindon and Yoren. With one shaking hand he then reached out and pulled the cloth. Under it was a cage. And in that cage was a severed head. A head with rolling eyes and a mouth that opened and closed and hissed. This time there was horror in the suzerain, as men and women shrieked and pulled away from the cage. Yoren watched this calmly, whilst Brindon noticed that Brian merely blinked. The green men did not react at all, which was interesting. As for Walder Frey, he had gone as white as a sheet. And then blood seemed to flush into his face. His mouth opened and closed for a moment and then one side of his face went slack and there was a sudden stench of urine as the man pissed himself, before his eyes rolled back in his skull and he collapsed bonelessly in his chair. As various Freys screamed and leapt towards the chair, Brindon suppressed a smile. What a tragedy. Cat. The desk in Ned's solar never seemed to be free of paper and parchment. She looked at the heaps wryly and then sighed a little. There was always so much to do in Winterfell, and with Ned away and Brandon just a boy, it fell to her to arrange matters as much as she could. Sansa, bless her, was trying to learn. She would be a lady herself in a few years, and Lewin was a tower of strength, but she missed Ned fiercely as she dealt with the 101 things a day that had to be taken care of in a citadel the size of Winterfell, especially with all the work that was being done on Wintertown nearby. Winter was coming. Everyone around her seemed to know it now, and she had a steady stream of people coming to her with progress reports of food being sown, others harvested, yet others pickled, or salted, or preserved in some manner. And then there was the work on the broken tower. Once it was mended they'd obviously have to find another name for it, but Ned's orders were being followed to the letter. The structure was sound, the rotted timbers in the upper courses had been removed, the stonework redone in places and the scaffolding erected. It wasn't finished of course, and the workers would be busy on other matters when the king arrived. Too noisy otherwise. According to the last messages the king was about 2 days away. Ned was on his way back and was also about 2 days away by her best guess. It all felt horribly tight, as if the world was pressing in around her, as if there was a flood of events bearing down on Winterfell. It worried her, and she also knew that it worried Lewin. She sighed again as she looked back at the pile of work in front of her, and then she heard the sound of running boots in the corridor outside, followed by the frantic tattoo of knocks on the door. Startled she stood. Enter. The door was flung open to reveal a panting Jory Castle. My lady, the watchtowers report. Riders approaching. Stark. Banners. Tease Lord Stark they report. Her heart leapt within her breast and she beamed at him before sweeping out, the wheezing man following her. As she all but ran down the corridor she saw Sansa and Domeric round a corner, Septa Mordane in tow, and she waved at them. Sansa, your father is approaching. Her daughter stopped, startled, and then she and her betrothed ran to join her, Lady running ahead of them and a huffing Septa Mordane behind. As her little party emerged into the great courtyard she could see that Sir Roderick Castle was busy getting an honor guard in place, with many glares and not a few barked commands. He looked up as she approached and bowed quickly, before going back to making sure that the Lord of the North received a proper welcome back. The terrible threesome had emerged from a corridor somewhere, Summer gambolling ahead of them, whilst Arya and Nymeria had also appeared. Arya's dress had mud on it from somewhere and she was wearing a helmet for some bizarre reason. She rolled her eyes at Lewin, who was nearest, and then man grinned briefly before taking it off her daughter. The gates were open and her heart was pounding as they all waited. Ned must have flown down from Castle Black and she wondered what it had cost him. And then there was the sound of horsemen and she watched as the party came through the man gates, mounted on blowing horses. Frostfear preceded them and she smiled as the other direwolves bounded up to their mother as she guided them into a corner and then licked each in turn. As Ned dismounted she blinked. He looked so tired and thinner than he'd been for some time. Her husband had been driving himself hard, she could tell that at a glance. She wanted to run into his arms, but she had appearances to keep up, so instead she strode forwards. "My lord, Winterfell is yours." Ned smiled that special little smile that he reserved only for her and then nodded at her, before taking both her hands in his and kissing them. "Thank you, my lady." And then he embraced her. She melted into his arms, almost in tears. "Gods, I'm tired," he whispered in her ear. "We made good time though." As she stepped out of his arms and looked at the rest of Ned's party, she smiled at the sight of Robb. He looked tired as well, as did Jon and Theon, but they were all healthy apart from that. Tyrion Lannister looked as if he was about to fall over, as did many of the others, and Ned called out orders for them all to be taken care of. "We have some interesting guests," Ned muttered quietly to her. "But first, are you well? Is the babe well?" "I am well and it seems to be thriving. Lewin's pleased with me," she replied. "But, what guests? I can see Mance Rayder again, and I remember Gia Mormont, but who are the others?" "I will introduce you." "Good, and then I need to tell you about the guests we have here." Ned groaned quietly. "Important ones. Robert cannot be here already, he would be roaring at me and slapping my back by now." "Important enough." She sniffed. "It might be best if you bathed first though." "Oh, I do smell, cat, and my ass is one giant bruise." "Come, let me introduce to the rest of the party and then you'd best come with me to make sure that I don't fall asleep in the bath." Ned. He was tired. Gods in the trees, was he tired, but there was too much to do. At least he now smelled a lot better and he'd been able to nap for an hour or two. Not nearly as much as he would like to, but just enough to take the edge off his weariness. Robb, Jon and Theon had also bathed but were now asleep, and the word from the guest quarters was that so were all the others, except for Tyrion Lannister for some reason. But he himself had too much to do and he was now sitting in his solar, staring at all the papers. Kat had done an excellent job, but there was so much that only he could do. The door creaked open and Kat entered, closing the door very firmly behind her. "Edric Stark is coming, as you requested," she said as she sat down in front of him. "There's something you need to know first about Arya and Bran." She twisted her fingers together for a long moment. "I discovered something about them when you were gone. Something that I had a hard time accepting at first. Ned, our daughter and our son are wargs." He stared at her. "Say that again." "They're what?" "Wargs, Ned. Arya discovered it first," she said. "She was having odd dreams, where she was in Nymeria, but then she realized that they were more than mere dreams, that she really was in her direwolf." She looked about the room, distressed. I did not believe her at first when she told me. It slipped out when I was talking with her about taking her lessons with Septum Ordain more seriously, but she said that as the long night was coming, there wasn't much point in needlework if Whites and the others were coming, and then she said that she needed other knowledge and that she was a warg. I did not believe her at first, not truly, which upset her, but once she showed me, then I believed." He sat there, absorbing that knowledge with wide eyes. She showed you?" "She did. Her eyes turned as white as milk right there in front of me, and Nymeria obeyed every order I gave her, including tapping out the answers to sums with her paw. Arya truly is a warg. And so is Bran. They both need teaching in this thing, and there is nothing that I or Lewin can suggest." After a long moment Ned leant back in his chair as he thought very hard and very fast. "By the old gods. I knew that Arya wanted to be a warg, but 'tis another matter to become one. That said, why should it not be true, after all the things that we have seen over these many months?" He pondered again. "I'll ask Rayder if any of his men are, or know of, wargs. The wildlings have often surprised me with what they know of the old ways. And if Arya is indeed a warg, well, that is something we can use." Kat sighed a little but nodded, before pulling out the red ledger that he had seen before. "When you talk to Edric Stark you need to have this, I think." "Oh?" he asked as he took it. "Why?" Bran noticed what we did not, it has a rose embossed on the cover. So it did. You think that there is a connection to the Company of the Rose? Given the list of what appear to be contracts inside, yes. And Ned, the last pages of writing are in your father's hand, or so Lewin told me. He leafed through the book to those pages and studied the script, before feeling his face pale. Yes, the entries were indeed in his father's hand. Damn it, how did I not notice that before? You were looking for information on the others, not strange entries about contracts. Ned nodded and then placed it to one side. So much to do. I'll deal with the Company of the Rose first and then see Bootle. We'll try him in the Great Hall, I think. We'll do it properly, so that Daisy will see her father avenged. I'll make the preparations, Kat said as she stood up. Oh, and Lord Dane wishes to speak with you. I know, Ned groaned. I know he's just a boy, or near enough, but every time I see that damn sword I remember the Tower of Joy. Ned, when he and Lord Dondarrion pledged their help, that sword glowed. There's something odd about it. He stared at her carefully. It did what? It glowed. I take it that it didn't do that when you fought Arthur Dane. No, he muttered, thinking back to that terrible day. But the way that that bloody man was all but gurning as he fought me, there was something going on with it. It seemed fine when I strapped it to one of the horses afterwards. Anyway, I'll ask him about it when I see him. A fist thumped on the door and he stood as Kat bustled to the door and opened it to reveal a dark-haired man who looked a little younger than Ned. He was dressed in dark grey clothes and he held a book with the red cover that looked surprisingly familiar. He also looked a bit nervous. Edric Stark, Ned said Kat, before leaving. His cousin hovered near the door for a moment before stepping into the room at his gesture to approach, closing the door behind him. There was a long moment as the two men sized each other up. You look a bit like my grandfather, Ned said eventually, breaking the silence. And you like my great-uncle, came the reply, before the other man seemed to recollect where he was. Your pardon, Lord Stark. I am Edric Stark, once leader of the Company of the Rose. He drew himself up almost formally and then bowed and held out the book. The company is disbanded, in answer to the call. We have done out duty as was commanded long ago and have returned to the north. Command us. Ned paused, before taking the book. Cousin, welcome back, but what do I even call you? Edric. Lord Edric. He hefted the book for a moment. Are these your records? I must tell you now that as the second son of my father there is much that I was not told about you and the company. A noise escaped Edric's mouth, something like a cross between a sigh and a groan. I feared as much. Hells, my father feared as much. He sank into a chair, ran a hand over his face and then looked up at him. How much do you know about the Company of the Rose? Just that you were founded by exiles, those that refused to bend the knee to the Targaryens, Ned replied as he sat down himself and placed Edric's book next to the one from the secret room. Yes, Edric replied wryly, and, no. We were indeed founded by those who refused to bend the knee. The thing is that they were ordered to by Torrhen Stark, our ancestor. Ned stared at him. What? When Torrhen Stark came south to support the other kings in opposing Aegon the Conqueror, he was horrified by what had happened at the Field of Fire, the Last Storm and Harrenhal. So he halted his army at the Trident, as everyone knows, before meeting Aegon and bending the knee. What people don't know is that before he bent the knee he went to the Isle of Faces and consulted with the Green Men, or rather the Green Man, the leader on the island. I didn't know that, Ned said with a frown. Few do, Edric replied. It's a secret passed on from father to son amongst the Starks alone, when they come of age. He fell silent. Or so I hoped. Lord Ricard never told you. He never had a chance to do so, Ned said grimly. As my father and I feared then. Very well, the Green Man of the time was a Tully and he told our ancestor what he had told his nephew, the new Lord of the Riverlands. There were 3 things that they both had to know, only he added some more details for Torrhen Stark. All 3 things were secrets that had to be kept. The first was that any promises of new swords made from Valyrian steel were worthless, because the secret of making the steel died at the Doom. The second was that the Targaryens were just lesser dragon lords, not greater ones, so that eventually the dragon lore of the Targaryens would fade and the dragons would be lost, which was a shame because a time would come when they would be needed again. The third secret was that there was another piece of Valyrian knowledge that would fade with time, how to wed brother to sister and not have children that were deformed or lunatics. Because when that happened then Westeros would have mad kings, and that they would not be kind to Northmen. He remembered the moment that Jon Arryn had called him to his solar, pale and strained, to pass on the news that father and Brandon were not just dead but had died in such cruel circumstances. Remembered all the tales of the Mad King, cackling and gibbering on his bloody throne. Those were 3 secrets that were all true then, he said hoarsely. All too true. But what does that have to do with? He stopped talking as the pieces fell into place in his head. Torrhen Stark created the Company of the Rose to protect northern nobles. He did. He ordered the main families of the north to send their second or third sons to Essos, to join the sellsword company that he was organizing and funding there in great secrecy. So that no matter what happened in Westeros, the lords of the north would always have kin that would replace them in the event of disaster. Such a mad king ordering the deaths of a lordly family on a whim. And although these passed almost 300 years, we were there. Waiting, in reserve. Brokering quiet marriages with noble families of the north. Keeping ties to the north. Taking on assignments, like all sellsword companies, but never great and terrible ones. We were not the Gold Company, who supported the Black Fires. Instead we were just the Company of the Rose. Stolid and dependable. We would take on missions and inform Winterfell through secret ways. The final arbiter of if we should do anything or not was always the Stark in Winterfell. He pointed at the books. You'll find the hand of many a past Stark in those books, on both sides of the narrow sea. We earned quite a bit of gold over the years, all safely tucked away in the Iron Bank. There is an account owned by the Starks, and that money is yours. And then there are those owned by each family in the company. Or there were. We have brought that money that we had over with us. Ned stared at the books and then at his cousin, stunned. How many families? I made a list. He pulled it out and handed it over to Ned. You'll find some names on it that have long since died out here. Blinking with surprise, Ned quickly passed his eyes over the list. By the old gods, he muttered after a long moment. Red Starks. Ryders. Dustins. I to all of them. There's even some Boltons. We heard that the family over here was reduced to just 2 true-born members. Ned could feel his mind whirring like a Mriish tour. He had always felt a certain amount of shame at the fact that the north had not prospered as much as other areas of the realm, that there were extinct houses here and there. And now. This will complicate some matters. And also mean that there will be lords reclaiming ruined holdfasts. We will cope with anything that arises from that. He shook his head. You have done well, cousin. Edric hung his head for a moment. Don't thank me, thank my forefathers. We came damn close to disaster a time or two. Last time was when word came of the death of your father. Lord Ricard once went to Pentos, when you were young, I believe. He met my father there. They became good friends. When word came of his death, and your brother, and especially the nature of those deaths, well, it was touch and go if the company would remain in Essos or break apart and return to the north to lay our swords at your feet. My father was tempted himself, but talked himself hoarse, persuading people that they could not go. Ned thought about this and then nodded himself. Ah, it was proof of why the company had been set up. A bitter smile crossed the face of his cousin. Exact proof, as it were. It demonstrated why we were in Essos. I followed your progress with great attention. You have no idea how relieved I was when you triumphed. It shook the company, Robert's rebellion. This made a frown cross Ned's face. Wait, when Robert's rebellion was over and the Targaryens were thrown down, why did you not return then? 2 reasons. Firstly, Robert Baratheon has Targaryen blood and we did not know him. Secondly, no word to return came from you. Winterfell was silent and we did not know what to do. You could not send word. We send word via the secret channels. You did not reply. I never knew of those secret channels. I know that now. My father suspected that you had not been told of us. But we could not openly send word. That eunuch that reported for the Mad King was now reporting to Robert Baratheon, and we could not take the risk of muddying the waters by attracting his attention, especially as he had odd ties to people close to the Gold Company. The oath we all took, whenever a man or woman of the company came of age, still stood. Not to return until we had word from Winterfell. But I did not send word, and you are here now. Why? The call. That always had precedence. Should the call ever be sent, should the others ever awaken, that extinguished one oath and replaced it with another, to return. Well, return you have. Will you keep the name Stark or found a cadet branch? I have sons and daughters. I was thinking about the name Rossestak and a holdfast somewhere. Ned stood, walked around the desk and clasped hands with the other man. Then let me be the first to greet you as Lord Rossestak of the North. Welcome home, cousin. Welcome home. Tyrion. He was several miles beyond tired, and he wanted nothing more than to slump into a bed and fall asleep. The past few days had been beyond unpleasant, an unending series of painful jolts as they galloped south. Yes, Ned Stark was a formidable man indeed. Even father would have been impressed by the speed of their party. Uncle Geryon certainly had been. Much as he wanted to fall asleep though, there was something more important that he had to do. That meant, of course, jumbling his thoughts back into order every now and then, but... He paused as he realized that he was walking with his eyes shut. That was bad, very bad. A bad idea. He pinched the base of his thumb for a moment to wake up again and then walked on. Liniment. He needed more liniment. Wait. Liniment. Yes. He found Daisy Shuristone sitting in the godswood, sitting before the heart tree. She looked, very intent. Focused. The leaves were whispering slightly in the branches above her, and he stopped dead in his tracks for a long moment, before walking slowly towards her. As he approached she looked up and blinked a little, before smiling. Tyrion. I heard that you were back. I am. He sat down very carefully on what was hopefully a soft patch of grass. I'm a bit achy. She blinked at him again. I'd be amazed if you weren't, she said dryly. How many miles have you ridden? That was a good question. He paused. I'm not entirely sure. A lot. Over far too few days. Parts of me hurt that I didn't even know existed. I ran out of liniment. I'm afraid other people begged me for it. She peered closely at him. Tyrion, are you all right? I'm a bit weary. Actually, I'm very tired, but that's besides the point. I saw many carts by the main walls with the sigil of House Shuristone. Has anything happened? Her nostrils flared for a long moment. Willem Bootle is in a cell here. Ah. He said the word carefully. When is he being tried? Later today or early tomorrow? Ned's got a lot to do. Such as? The leaders of the Company of the Rose are here. Lord Dondarrion and Dane have arrived, the latter bearing a glowing sword. And the king is due to arrive the day after tomorrow. He thought that all through. Yes, I see your point. The wall was quite eventful as well. She peered at him again. So I see. You have acquired the beginning of a beard, an axe and 2 daggers. Tyrion suppressed a giggle. Oh, the beard was to stop my face catching a cold. The axe and the daggers were left to me by an ancestor of mine, one Tyrk Lannister. The daggers are called the Warnings. They glow at the approach of whites and others. The axe is called Rocktooth and it kills whites and others. Quite spectacularly too, I might add. Peering did not seem to be enough for Daisy Shuristone, because suddenly she was boggling. Whites. She said the word in a strained voice. Others. You have seen them both. Oh yes. His eyes were fluttering quite hard right now. Gods, but he was tired. Seen them and helped kill them. There were a lot of whites and 4 others. They were trying to get to Rickon Stark, a member of the Night's Watch who was half turned by another centuries ago, but who was saved by the children of the forest. He was carrying magic within him to help mend the wall, so that South could talk to North and North to South. We protected Rickon Stark, Cold Hands he renamed himself, quite apt actually, and killed them. I used Rocktooth on a few whites and another. Robb Stark got 1, Jon Stark got 1, and so did Uncle Geryon. Valyrian steel is quite effective. Then we got cold hands through the wall via a magic gate and he fixed it and died. There was a long moment of silence and then Daisy shuffled over to sit next to him. I think she said eventually, that you are going to have to tell me exactly what happened. Only later, when you are less exhausted and more coherent. What a good idea, he said faintly, his eyelids fluttering so hard that there was more darkness than light in his vision. I think a nap might be in order. And then he slumped down against her. The last thing he knew before he fell asleep was that his head was on her lap and that her hand was stroking his hair as the wind gently rustled the leaves above them. Home. He was home. And then sleep took him. Chapter 32. Chapter text. Arya. Men were moving benches about in the great hall and she sat on a low wall, with Nymeria sitting gravely at her feet, and watched. She'd been so happy to see father again, but also a bit nervous. What would mother tell him about her warging? Everything had changed just that little bit in the wake of that talk of theirs. She'd had to do a little less embroidery, which meant that she had a little more time to practice warging. And it was important, that practicing. She loved Nymeria fiercely and the last thing that she wanted to do was ever hurt her, so she had to be careful. Warging could be hard if she was tired, and some of the tales from old Nan about people who warged in but could never warg out again were, well, they were a bit scary. Plus she had to teach Bran, who was a fast learner. She wondered sometimes if any more of her brothers or Sansa were wargs. Or Uncle Benjen, or even father. It was a bit hard to ask Robb or Jon at the moment as they were asleep. She wasn't sure why, they'd just been riding home with father. Now, she could imagine father as a warg. Father could do anything. And Frostfire was, well, she knew when she was warging into Nymeria. She'd warged into her direwolf an hour earlier, only to be stared at and then licked by the adult direwolf in a slightly amused and slightly bemused manner. Frostfire knew. Grey Wind and Ghost padded past, sniffing Nymeria, and she looked around in time to see a yawning Robb and Jon stroll into view, followed by an equally tired Theon. They were all thinner than they had been and she knew that mother was going to fuss and insist that they all eat something. She was glad that mother was treating Jon better these days. Come on, Trouble, Robb said affectionately. Father wants us all in the great hall. She frowned. What for? The smile vanished. Bootle's being tried. This time she blinked. I thought that wasn't until tomorrow. Jon shook his head. Today. The king's coming and father wants this out of the way. He looked her up and down. Well, he said eventually, you're not too bad. Has Lady Stark seen you? Lady Stark, said a forbidding voice behind them all, has been looking for you, Arya. Septa Mordane inspected her with a hint of despair. Oh dear. Come on, quickly. A clean dress and a comb through your hair will have to do. Protesting did no good, despite her very well thought out and well-reasoned arguments, and she even had to rub a flannel of warm water over her face, before being escorted, clean and sullen, to the great hall. The room was full, and as she squeezed onto the end of a bench next to Bran she looked about. Domeric Bolton was sitting on a nearby bench, looking solemn. He's there to record the proceedings for his father, she heard Sansa tell Robb. Lord Sherestone was well loved. She was also fascinated to see that the imp had family next to him, one being the uncle that everyone had thought was dead and the other being his cousin. They all looked a bit tired. Doors boomed open to one side and everyone stood. Startled, she too scrambled to her feet and then watched as father walked into the room, flanked by the old bear and oddly enough Lord Dondarrion, with Frostfire padding after them. Father was holding the Fist of Winter in both hands, and as they reached the table with the 3 chairs behind it he took the central chair and then placed the ancient weapon in front of him with a formality that made her shiver for a moment. The other 2 men took their places on either side of him, whilst Frostfire sat to one side. Bring in the prisoner, father said in a voice that she had never heard from him before, low and hard and intent. More doors opened and the sullen figure of Sir Willem Bootle was escorted into the great hall, guarded by Jory Castle and his uncle. The prisoner was pale as he entered and even paler as he finally reached the chair that had been reserved for him. This trial is convened, father said as the doors shut with a boom and everyone sat down again. I, Lord Eddard Stark, the Stark in Winterfell, will preside over it, the trial being witnessed by the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Gyr Mormont, and the Lord of Blackhaven, Lord Beric Dondarrion. He looked at Bootle, who quailed a little. Sir Willem Bootle stands accused of the crimes of murder and usurpation, in that he did murder Lord Torbjorn Sherestone and then did usurp his title, falsely claiming to be his heir. A lot of people muttered angrily about that, and she looked about the great hall, trying to catch what people were saying. She'd never seen the sea, but it must have sounded like that, noise going backwards and forwards, hard to hear. Father paused, and then when silence fell again he looked at the accused man. "How do you plead?" Bootle stood shakily, took a deep breath and then looked about the room, raising his chin in a way that made him look like a cockerel with a neck problem. "I am innocent. I am Lord Sherestone, as I was his heir." There was a shocked pause, and then a lot of people started to shout and all but snarl. The noise washed over her, but she had eyes only for the three men at the table. Father's eyes had narrowed dangerously, the old bear was sniffing contemptuously, and Lord Donderion looked as if a bad smell had passed under his nose. It was then that she noticed that Daisy had arrived, and that the imp was now sitting next to her. There was something odd going on between those two, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Father raised a hand and the muttering stopped. Then he stood. "Maester Lewin, please bring forth Lord Torbjorn Sherestone's will." The old maester stepped forwards, a scroll in his hand that had two seals on it. "This was deposited under the care of Lord Stark last year, my lords," he said as he passed the scroll to Lord Donderion. The Lightning Lord inspected the seals carefully. "They have not been tampered with," he said gravely, before handing it over to the old bear, who also looked at the seals. "The seals have not been tampered with," the old man agreed, before catching Father's nod and cracking the seals and opening the scroll. He read quickly, handed it over to Lord Donderion, who also read it and then handed it to Father. Father read it as well and then handed it back to Maester Lewin. Lord Sherestone named his daughter and only child Daisy Sherestone as his heir, as witnessed by me, Father announced. "Maester Lewin." The old maester unrolled the scroll. "It is as Lord Stark said," he proclaimed grimly. "Daisy Sherestone was the heir to Sherestone, not Sir Willem. Word came to us last year from Sir Edmure Tully, my good brother, that Sir Willem was a ne'er-do-well, that he was perennially short of coin, that he had alienated his neighbours and was not trusted in the Riverlands. He would never have been a fit heir to Sherestone. But then he was never the heir. There must always be a Sherestone in Sherestone, and he was related to the late Lord Sherestone's wife, not Lord Sherestone himself. No matter what this," Father curled a lip as he looked at him. "Man thought, he was never the heir. Daisy Sherestone is." Bootle had been swelling with either rage or gas with every word, and now he erupted. "Lies," he all but squealed. "Lies. I am the Lord of Sherestone. That girl cannot inherit, she is nothing but a girl, and I—" "Silence." Father's voice cracked out like a whip and silenced everyone in the room at once. Bootle blanched and leant back from Father's wrath. "The will is clear. Lord Sherestone told me that his only child was his heir. Told me to my face and then wrote it in his will. Are you calling me a liar?" The great hall was silence as Bootle's face twisted and his mouth hung open. After a long moment he shook his head fearfully. "Now as to the matter of the death of Lord Sherestone," Maester Lewin said quietly but firmly to one side. "It was blamed on a stroke, my lord. But on the arrest of Sir Willem a search of his possessions was made by one Edmund Hunter, in service to Sir Edmure Tully." "Step forth, Edmund Hunter," Father rumbled. The white-bearded man who had arrived with Bootle stepped forwards, dressed in the fish-scale leather armor that always fascinated Arya. "What was found when you searched Bootle's possessions?" "My Lord," Hunter said with a respectful bob of the head to Father, "we found a journal which mentioned that Sir Willem was deep in debt to a man called Callis, who was in turn in the employ of the traitor Petter Baelish. We also found this jar." He gestured to one side and another Riverlander walked up with a stone jar that had once been sealed with wax around the edge of the lid. "The prisoner seemed rather concerned that we had it." He said the last words dryly, before directing a look of contempt at Bootle, who was in turn looking around for the nearest door with a look of abject terror. Father thanked the Riverlanders, telling them that his own thanks would go with them back to Riverrun and House Tully, before turning to Maester Lewin again. "Do you know what is in this jar, Maester Lewin?" "I do, my lord. It contains a powder that I have tested. It is a poison from Essos, called Hearts Forlorn. It dissolves easily in liquid, such as wine, and if drunk kills by mimicking an apoplexy, such as that which apparently killed Lord Sheristone. It is a most cruel poison. Daisy was white as a sheet and the imp was holding her hand now, whilst the crowd in the great hall was muttering and growling with fury. Father stared at Bootle again and then raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "You stand accused of murder, Sir Willem. What say you to this?" "I did not kill him," Bootle gabbled. "I swear it." "The stone jar." Bootle licked his lips, which were almost bloodless set amidst his pale, strained face. He seemed to be sweating a great deal. "Not mine," he said hoarsely. "Planted by my enemies." Arya scoffed. "He lied like Rook and did very badly." A bench scraped and then a bald man stood up. He was that odd, earless man who had arrived with Father and who was wearing leather garments with bronze adornments. After Father nodded at him he straightened and then spoke in the old tongue, something that Arya sort of understood. "My lord of Stark name, this man of the south would swear that he is innocent, would he?" "Have him swear on the great fist." Legend has it that an ill oath sworn on it is quickly shown to be a lie. There was widespread muttering at this, as many people translated for others, and then after a long moment Father nodded slowly. "Very well. Guards, bring the prisoner forwards to this table." Bootle's boots scuffed and scraped on the flagstones as he was all but dragged before Father and the other two men. Arya watched in fascination as something seemed to prickle her on the back of her neck. "You'd swear your innocence, would you?" Father smiled thinly and then grabbed Bootle's hands and placed them forcibly on the fist of Winter. "Then here's your chance. Swear that you did not murder my cousin, Lord Sheristone." The great hall was totally silent as Bootle looked down at his trembling hands which Father was still pressing down onto the ancient mace. He licked his lips nervously, his lower lip also trembling for a moment. And then he looked up, visibly gathering his tattered wits about him. "I am not afraid of your legends and your heathen symbols," he hissed. "I swear that I did not murder Lord Sheristone. I swear that I am innocent." There was a long moment of tension and then Bootle seemed to relax a little. "Is that it?" Beck thunder rolled far overhead and then there was a sudden flash of light within the hall, followed by a great boom that shook her to her very bones. All the direwolves threw their heads back and howled for a long moment and then Bootle let out a choked half scream as red fire seemed to engulf him for an instant and then he flew backwards from the table and smashed into the ground, smoking slightly, his arms stiff in front of him. She knew at once that he was dead. "Perhaps you should have been afraid," then Father rumbled and then the hall erupted with noise. Oberyn. Doran was riding one of his favorite horses, a brown mare that remarkably calm given its lineage. His brother was getting fit again in stages, starting with riding, along with a little sword work. He was still listening to the maester whose advice had lessened the pain in his feet from the gout and although he kept good-naturedly complaining about it to Oberyn, he knew that his brother was intent on keeping to it. He sensed someone approaching and he turned his head a little. Arianne was standing there, dressed in riding leathers and looking a bit wide-eyed at the sight of her father out of that damned wheeled chair. "Quentin said that Father was better, but I never thought that he'd be riding again," she breathed, before looking at him. "Your master friend deserves my thanks." He nodded, but then noticed that she still had a frown on her face. "What is it?" "Uncle Oberyn, what's going on?" He sat down on a nearby bench and waved a languid hand. "Many things are going on. Can you be more specific?" This brought him a glare. "This." She waved a hand at her father. "Father changes what he eats to get rid of his gout, because he wants to be healthy again. You start talking to the Citadel again and researching the legends of the Stony Dornish. Uncle Oberyn, what is happening? Are we going to war?" He stroked his chin. "A good question, niece. Perhaps, but not a war that we are familiar with. You have heard about what happened to Lord Dane?" "I did. His son is the new Lord Dane and also the Sword of the Morning. Other members of the Stony Dornish are going north. Even Anders Urenwood has sent men north to the war." Arianne narrowed her eyes. "Anders Urenwood is an ambitious horseman. Why is he sending men to the north?" "You just dislike him because he thinks that Quentin should be the heir to Sunspear, not you. And Urenwood is just doing what other Stony Dornish are doing. Including House Fowler." Arianne sat down next to him. "Why?" The call. His niece eyed him carefully. Some of the salty and sandy Dornish doubt that the call even happened. I know. He smiled slightly. They are wrong. Something very, very old has woken up, something that dates back to the first men. Something that your father and I do not yet properly understand. Shoes scuffed to one side and a servant approached and bowed. My prince, a letter for you. He took it and then sat up. Sarala's hand. He inspected the wax seal carefully, found it unbroken and then cracked it open, before reading it quickly. As he read he frowned. Interesting, he muttered eventually. Then he turned the page, read what was there, stopped dead, reread it and then found his eyebrows shooting upwards. Ah. That's extremely, Now that's a sight I never thought I'd see, my brother rendered speechless. Doran had dismounted and was walking towards them, wiping the sweat from his neck with a damp cloth. What's amiss? Sarala has written from White Harbor. She has changed her plans, she's going to the wall. Doran raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Why? She says that the call has been heard by many people and that Ned Stark was meeting his main lords at Castle Black. Her trip to the wall instead of Winterfell makes sense therefore. But there's another reason for her going to the wall. She writes that she's on the same ship as Geryon Lannister. There was a pause as Doran and Arianne both stared at her. Geryon Lannister? Doran asked in disbelief. I thought that he was dead, lost seeking Valyria years ago. Is Sarala sure? He reread the letter. She says that he has lost an eye and gained a son, but that she is sure that it is him. And he is headed for the wall. Interesting. Doran stroked his chin thoughtfully. Then we must await her next letter. And let the stony Dornish know. He looked at his daughter. You look unconvinced, Arianne. She shrugged. I did not hear the call, father. We have some stony Dornish blood, but not enough for me to have heard it. But it did happen and we need to react. The stony Dornish are heading north in response to it. It's affecting all our neighbors. When a decision is made in King's Landing about this, we will need to be ready. And do what? Doran exchanged a long glance with him. If need be, re-engage with Westeros, Doran said eventually. This call both complicates matters and simplifies them. The Game of Thrones is temporarily postponed, but what has replaced it? Where do the Starks stand in all of this? How old is this, whatever it is, how dire is the threat, what will we need to do and when do we need to it? We need to know what's going on, Oberyn said restlessly. His feet twitched for a moment. It might be time to talk to a few people here and there. And he knew a man who had a very fast ship. Oh, and if old certainties were being eroded like sand on a beach before wind and tide, perhaps he needed to finally marry Ellaria. Ned. Daisy was going to have to go through all the wagons and carts and assess just what that repulsive little thief had taken from Shuristone and if any of it had been sold to pay off his debts. Fortunately his main creditor had already been very dead by the time that he had returned to the Riverlands. Even so, he didn't want to risk Daisy losing any particularly prized heirlooms. So, he had given orders for Lewin and Daisy to create an inventory of the wagons and also for a small party to return to Shuristone in order to reopen it, as he had no doubt that Bootle had had no intention of ever returning to it, other than to steal any remaining objects from it. Damn the man. Well, at least the ashes of Sir Willem Bootle would go back to the Riverlands in the possession of Ed Muir's men. He'd have to work out what to do with them. He winced slightly as he thought about the manner of the man's death. He had not expected that at all, something slower perhaps, but not justice that quickly. He was going to have to go through all the records again for any references to the fist. He already respected it, but he needed to understand it fully. As he sat down in his solar and stared at the books in front of him, he sighed. Robert was due tomorrow and he was not yet fully recovered from his trip south from Castle Black. That had been a trip that would stay with him for some time, especially given the bruises. He was impressed that those amongst his party who had not been that familiar with riding had made it. Tyrion Lannister had especially impressed him. The man hadn't let his physical limitations stop him, he'd just grimly kept riding. He rubbed his chin. If the man did announce his interest in Daisy, then he'd have to take it very seriously, especially as she seemed to like him. Knuckles rapped hesitantly on the door and he looked up. Lord Dane was standing there in the doorway, looking at him. "Lord Stark, may I speak with you?" "Ah." He stood formally and waved the boy in. As the Dornishman entered and then closed the door behind him, he looked him over and did his best not to wince. He looked very much like his uncle and also his aunt. He had the purple eyes of the Danes. Then Ned frowned a little. Perhaps the boy, because he was barely a man yet, was ill, because he was pale and sweating, even shaking a little. "How may I help you, Lord Dane?" He asked the question as he gestured at a chair. Lord Dane sat in the chair and it was then that Ned noticed that his knuckles were white as they gripped the arms. He was also leaning forwards, as it was not easy to sit with the great sword that was slung on his back. "Ah. I see that you bear Dawn," he said politely. The time he'd seen that sword, it had been in the hands of a sorrowing Ashura Dane at Starfall, and he forced himself not to think of her. "You must be the new sword of the morning then." "I am," Edric Dane muttered, suddenly ashen-faced. Then he seemed to recall where he was. "Your pardon, Lord Stark. I am here to lay my sword at your feet." He stood and then drew his sword. The pale blade was just as he remembered it from his nightmares, but it seemed to be brighter as its wielder knelt and did as he had said. The tip of the sword was not far from Ned's feet and he winced again as the memory of that sword as it nicked his shoulder all that time ago. Then he paused. The sword was shining. Kat had said that the sword had glowed when it had been as Bran's feet, but this was something else. He winced for a moment as the light grew and then it faded. "You have our fealty, Lord Stark," said Edric Dane hoarsely. "Command us." Ned paused. "Us?" Then he nodded. "Sheathe your sword, Lord Dane. You have answered the call and I thank you for it. You will have to forgive me. The last time I saw that sword was at Starfall." The boy nodded as he returned the sword to its scabbard and then carefully propped it against the wall. My father said that he owed you a great debt for returning it to Starfall." He paused and then sank back in his chair. "He died in King's Landing getting Dawn to me. He knew that I was the new sword of the morning. Normally there is a meeting of House Dane to decide it, but my father," his voice trailed away. The sheen of sweat was still there on his face and his fingers still trembled. "Before he died he bade me go to the Godswood in King's Landing and pray. It's an odd place, that Godswood. It lacks a weirwood tree, instead the heart tree is an oak. At dusk, when I prayed there, I heard things. Voices." Ned didn't think that it was possible, but if anything the lad somehow became even paler. "I was raised in the faith of the Seven, but I think I heard. I think. You heard the old gods?" Ned nodded. "I have heard them too. There's no shame in admitting that you were frightened by it." The lad closed his eyes for a long moment, before nodding. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he looked at Ned again. "I was told to pray again at the Godswood here in Winterfell. I would like to ask your permission to do so." Ned regarded him gravely before inclining his head again. "You may do so. Is that all you had to ask?" Lord Dane looked at him, his face working for a moment. "No," he said eventually. "There was something else." The sheen was back again, as was the trembling, before he wiped his face and then stilled his hands with what Ned recognized as an almighty stiffening of his will. "Before he died my father told me something. Something that I must now tell you. He said that he was not my father. Yes, he raised me as if he was my father, but that my mother could not bear children. The woman I thought of as my mother, that is. I'm sorry if this is confusing, I barely know where to begin." He stared at the lad worriedly. "I'm sorry, but what business is your family history to me?" "Because my mother was really Lady Ashura Dane," the lad finally blurted out. He looked at the door in a half panic, before lowering his voice to the point where Ned could barely hear him. "And my father, you are my father, Lord Stark." He sat there and tried to think this through. Ashura was his real mother. And he was his father. Impossible. "I'm sorry," he said eventually, "but that cannot be. If Ashura Dane was your real mother, then yes, I can see that you have her eyes. But I cannot be your father. I knew your mother and yes, I loved her dearly. But we never laid together." Edric Dane reached into his tunic and pulled out a letter. You met my mother for the first time at Harrenhal, I believe, he said quietly. The second time was at Starfall, when you returned Dawn and my uncle Arthur's bones. This letter, my father, or the man I thought was my father, wrote it. He said that when you arrived you were tired beyond words. You were wounded, you were grieving for your sister, your father, your brother and the friends you had lost in the war. He said that you were reeling in your saddle and that your companion, Lord Reed, was worried about you. That night you were tended to by a maester, you ate and drank deeply, you wept for those you had lost and you had to be all but carried to bed. He wiped his eyes for a moment. You were comforted by my mother. She spent the night with you. Ned froze in shock. He barely remembered anything of his trip to Starfall. The maester there had sewn him up well, with a liberal dose of the juice of the poppy, and then he had indeed had wine and... He froze. Surely that had been a dream. For all those years he had always thought that it had been a dream. Ushra's eyes, her tears of sympathy, the feel of her skin against his, those burning kisses, all a dream. It had been a dream. Hadn't it? The lad held the letter out with a trembling hand and, in a daze, he took it. It was written in a hand that wavered more than a bit, but it was signed by Lord Ulster Dane. And, it confirmed the lad's tale. Lord Stark. If you hold this in your hand then I am dead and young Ned is with you. He is a good lad and you must forgive him if he is stunned by the revelation that I am not his father. The truth is that you are. Young Ned was conceived the night that you stayed at Starfall. My sister, Ushra, told me all afterwards. She did not mean to lay with you, it was a moment of passion and grief, at the end of a war that had done grievous damage to Housdane and in truth come close to tearing us apart as a family. My brother, Arthur, wrote to me before his death. It was an anguished, rambling letter, filled with regrets. He said that he was driven by his oath, but that he had done things that he regretted. He said that he no longer deserved to wield Dawn. Lord Reed, recounting your battle, told me that he struck my brother just after he had wounded you and that Arthur seemed to be fighting with Dawn in that moment, that Arthur seemed to freeze as he tried to keep hold of Dawn. In that moment, I think that Dawn rejected Arthur. He had made it injure you and Dawn is tied to both our houses in ways that I cannot explain. When you brought Dawn and Arthur's bones back to us I think that a connection was made, one that I do not understand. I do know that it had one material impact, Ned. My own wife could not bear children, so we took him in as our own and loved him greatly. He will be the sword of the morning, as Dawn will answer to him far better than it could to anyone else. I ask your pardon if my thoughts ramble as I write this letter. I am dying. I hope to see Ned in King's Landing before I die and pass on Dawn. But you must know this of Ushra, she loved you dearly and the little time she had with you was very precious to her. She knew the realities that you both faced afterwards. You were now the Lord of the North, married to the daughter of a Lord Paramount. I do not think that she quite realized how tired and heartsick and, yes, drunk, you were that night. She always loved you. When she took her own life she was tired herself of existing in this world. She knew that her son was now being brought us as mine own. And she had experienced such losses. She had always been close to Elia Martell, and she was gone, as well as to Arthur, and he was gone too. Ned's birth had been a painful one, and she never truly recovered. You need to know that young Ned is your son, but you cannot acknowledge him as such. He is the last of the direct line of Danes. Should he die then his cousin inherits the title, and Drold Dane, also known as the Dark Star, is not a fit man to wield Dawn. I do not think that it would accept him, but he does not deserve to lay even a finger on it. I have taken Ned as my heir. The world knows him as my son. You know the truth that the world must not know. Forgive me, but we have no choice on this matter. Ned lowered the letter and looked at Edric Dane, who was looking at him with haunted eyes. As he peered at him he realized that his bastard son may have had his mother's eyes, but that he had Ned's mother's hair and also his grandfather's nose and chin. He stood, the lad standing at the same time, and then he took him in his arms and embraced him. You are my son, he whispered, and he could feel the lad sob briefly as he mourned what he had lost and what he had gained. I cannot admit it in public, but you are my son. Jamie. A long time ago, in Casterly Rock, a maester once tried to teach him the names of the stars that were emblazoned above his head. He peered at them and tried to prod his tired mind into life. That was, yes, the Ice Dragon. The shadow cat was up there, and the ghost and the galley. And the crook. He didn't know them all. Tyrion did. He'd ask his brother when they reached Winterfell. It had been far too long since he had seen his little brother. Far too long. He'd been surprised when he had heard that father had sent him to Winterfell, on a quest to find out more about all this talk about legends. Well, father had probably wanted to get Tyrion away from him. Father and Cersei were as one in their dislike of Tyrion, for reasons he would never understand. Tyrion had been a baby. Mother's death had never been his fault. Wishes. He wanted to laugh at the stars for a moment. When was the last time that he had been his own master, truly? Lord Tywin Lannister's heir, then made a Kingsguard to a man he had grown to realize had been a madman, then Kingsguard to a man who was all impulses, and now what? The Fat King was now almost the demon of the Trident again. On the road north, Robert Baratheon had been riding around and staring at some of the hills in a rather odd manner, muttering about defensible crags and how the land had been fought over in the distant past. He had wanted to scoff, but then he had heard the conversations between the Baratheon brothers and Sir Barristan. Selmy had taken everything they said very seriously. Jaime, on the other hand, had wanted to roll his eyes. Crags. Broken stone paths. Bare places. Legends. He paused for a moment, his half-smile vanishing. Legends. The head in the cage still bothered him. The man of the Night's Watch had gone south with it, but not before the entire party had seen it. Most had been very disturbed by it. So had he at first. But then Cersei had talked about how it had to be a trick severed heads did not move, or gnash. It had to be a trick of some sort. Everyone knew that the Night's Watch was always desperate for men and supplies. The head must have been a clever trick to get both. A mirish trinket perhaps with mechanisms that pulled on wires within it. Maybe. Perhaps. What would Tyrion think of it? Had his brother already seen it, or something like it? What would Tyrion say about it? He stared at the stars again. Baratheon's bastard had also been fascinated and worried by the head. He was a quiet little half-stag, good at swinging a hammer over an anvil at least. He knew enough to fade into the background at times, but Jaime knew that Tommen had been to see him over some piece of broken stirrup or something. Tommen liked the bastard. Cersei did not. In fact, Cersei wanted the bastard dead, or just gone. She made him uneasy sometimes, speaking and acting without thinking things through. It ran in the family. There were times when he felt as if all he ever did was run from one place to another, forced by other people into situations not of his own choosing. Father wanted so much from him, Cersei wanted so much from him, he knew what her dreams were like, and his sworn brothers wanted so much from him. Duty came in so many forms. When was the last time he had done something for himself? Truly. He sighed and turned back to the inn that was close to being overwhelmed with the king's party, before pausing. There were torches on the road to the south. A lot of them. Far off, but coming closer, like a storm of fireflies. He strode off to the guards who were standing by the road, also staring south. Sir Barristan Selmy was with them, and as Jaime approached he looked at him. Riders, Sir Jaime. And a lot of them. So I see, Jaime replied. Headed for the inn perhaps. If so, there's too many of them to stay here. There must be hundreds on the road. They waited and they watched as the torches approached and the riders slowed. Someone noticed them, and then a pair of riders approached, with others escorting them behind them. Jaime frowned. He could see enough of their armor to realize that they were from the Vale, and heavy horse at that. Then he looked at the two leading riders and blinked at the tabards. A red castle on a white field within a red embattled border, and black iron studs on a bronze field, bordered with runes. Lord Redfort, Lord Royce, Sir Barristan said with a nod of the head. Well met. There were two riders behind them, a man with the look of a Royce and a girl who seemed familiar for some reason. Sir Barristan Yon Royce boomed as he dismounted. So, the word on the road is true. His Grace is travelling to Winterfell. Came a voice from the darkness to one side, and Jaime blinked with surprise. His former fatness could move remarkably quietly for such a large man. To meet with Lord Stark. The Valyman kneeled in the road, before rising at the wave of the king's hand. Baratheon peered at the man hard, his face set with a frown. Why hide your armor under all that cloth, Bronze Yone? There was just enough light to see that yes, the burly man had indeed covered his armor in cloth wrapping or something like that. Lord Royce smiled slightly and then pushed some of the cloth back. Under it was one of the runes that he had always had all over his armor. And it was glowing. The others come, the Stark has called for aid and we are needed, Your Grace. Old things are waking up and both you and Lord Stark need to know things. Because in the words of House Royce, we remember. Ned. He took dinner in his solar. He didn't do it often, but he was tired and the day had been a stressful one. And he needed to think, in those long hours after dinner, as Winterfell started to go to sleep. He had a son that he had never known about. And he was even called Ned. He wasn't sure if he should laugh or cry at this new turn in the road of his life. He had son that he couldn't ever acknowledge was really his nephew and a real son who he could never even admit even existed. There was a knock on the door and he looked up. Kat was standing there in the doorway, looking at him with a look of concern. Are you well, Ned? He pulled a slight face, before standing up and beckoning her in. You'd best close the door and take a seat, he told her heavily. This needs to remain between just the two of us. She frowned, but closed the door and then walked to the nearest chair. Ned, what's wrong? Lord Dane came to speak with me. He laid down at my feet and said that he had heard the call. He pledged his fealty to me. He ran a hand over his chin. Kat, the sword glowed, just you said. I've seen it before but it never glowed before. Glowed and then it shone for an instant. She nodded. It glowed before Bran. She looked at him carefully. Ned, what else happened? You have been out of sorts for hours. His wife knew him all too well at times. He sighed. Kat, I told you months ago that I would hold no more secrets from you. Well, this is something that I only found out today. Edric Dane is not the son of Alster Dane and his wife, because she was barren and could bear him no children. His real mother was Ashura Dane. Spots of red appeared in Kat's cheeks. I remember her, she said levelly. I met her once. I met her at Harren al Ned's side. At the Great Tourney. And again at Starfall, where Howland Reed and I took ship for King's Landing. I bore Dorne and Arthur Dane's bones back to Starfall and their maester tended to my wound. It needed more that Howland could provide. I barely remember anything about my time there. I was so tired, stricken with grief after losing Lyanna and my friends. The maester used the juice of the poppy on me before he stitched the wound, and there was wine because the war was over, but the mourning was deep for all of us. Apparently Ashura Dane visited me that night. All I remember is thinking afterwards that it had all been a dream, because I barely knew where I was. The red spots on his wife's cheeks were still there as her nostrils flared. Ned, she said in a voice that seemed to be tightly controlled. Are you saying that Edric Dane is? He says he is my son, Ned said heavily. A son I never knew I had. I am sorry, Kat, I am sorry. I barely remember anything of Starfall. Kat seemed to be struggling to control herself. So you are saying that you have a bastard son that no one knows about, apart from him and us? Yes. A silence. And then, oddly, Kat started to laugh. It was a strained laugh, that subsided into hiccuping giggling, but it was a laugh. He stared at her, his eyebrows going up. Finally she recovered enough to look at him. You must admit, Ned, that this is the exact opposite to the situation with Jon. He thought about it and then felt a tired smile lift his mouth for a moment. I agree. Like Jon, we can never tell anyone the truth. He is Lord Dane now. He asked for nothing from me, other than that I should know the truth. He seems to be a good lad. It must have been hard for him to hear that the man he thought was his father, wasn't. He sighed. Kat, I am so sorry about this. I really had no idea about this. Ashura was willful at times. She had just lost her brother and, well, I have no words. She is long dead now. All I can do is apologize. Kat closed her eyes and sighed. I am not happy at all, Ned, but you truly never knew about him and I cannot blame him or you for the actions of his mother. You know that I have always distrusted bastards as being a threat to the true-born heirs, But as the world thinks that Ned Dane is a true-born heir himself, of House Dane, she opened her eyes and smiled slightly at him. I am not happy, Ned, but I cannot find it in me to blame you over much, or him. I have a lot of thinking to do. In the meantime the king will arrive tomorrow. And we have too much to do for me to worry about young Ned. I just wish that he had been given another name. I know, he said softly as he looked at his wife and once again blessed the old gods for his luck. Cat had changed in these past months. So had he, if he had to admit it. Tell how the work has gone on the broken tower. As you had planned. It's ready. Then we just await Robert tomorrow. He stood up and held his hand out to Cat, who took it as she too stood up. He kissed each hand and then held her close. You are my wife. You have my heart. No one else. Just you. She softened into his embrace and he rested his chin against her hair. Tomorrow it began. Asher. The word came for her to see her uncle just after dawn. She'd finally been able to get a good night's sleep. Too many bad dreams of dead men and women, of charred ashes, of voices wailing on the wind, but she just nodded at the messenger before dressing in a hurry and walking down the corridors that led to his solar. Uncle Roderick was sitting at his desk, his new wife at his side. Both were looking at the message in front of them with almost identical scowls of thought. They both looked up as Asher entered, and the reader smiled slightly and pushed the message across the desk at her. You should read that. It's from Pike. She felt a frown of her own forming on her face as she reached out and picked it up, before reading it. Then she reread it. And then she read it again. Father offers us a truce. She sat down and stared at the message again. A truce and a meeting on Pike, not in the castle, but the open air. Leaning back in the chair she thought long and hard. It's a trap. Her uncle swapped a look with his wife. I told you that she'd see it as fast as I did, Alice said. And she's right. I know that you're both right, he replied. Of course it's a trap. The question is, what do we do with the fact that we know it's a trap? You could refuse to go. He pulled a face. We need to make an effort, somehow. We are all Ironborn. We must all live together on these islands. Your father has to realize that he has made terrible mistakes, but we are fighting to live and not to overthrow him. What the future holds I do not know, nor how we can make peace, but, he paused, deep in thought. Asher traded a troubled gaze with Alice and was about to ask what was wrong when her uncle suddenly smiled. Asher, when can the Black Wind next sail? On the next tide. I always keep her provisioned and ready to sail. As I thought. Get your crew together. I am sending you to Winterfell. Her eyebrows flew up as she stood. Why, oh, wait. Baratheon is head for there, isn't he? He and his hand, Stannis Baratheon. He pulled a face. I don't like it, not after the death of my sons at Fair Isle, but the Baratheons demand peace in these islands, and appealing to them directly is one way to forestall whatever your father's plans are for this truce meeting. And if we do attend it with a representative of Robert Baratheon there, that will tear the sails of whatever father has planned. She stood and looked at the door. I'll sail on the next tide for Blazewater Bay and then Salt Spear. I'll have to buy a horse on the road, but I'll try and make best speed for Winterfell. And I'll try and buy time. Send word when you can. She nodded at them both and then headed for the door at a half run. Well, at least she was going to be amid quite the host of people there. From what she had heard, Winterfell was going to be crowded. Jory. He seemed to be walking around in a daze half the time. Happiness did that to a man, he knew that now. Especially as he was going to be a father. Anna had missed her moon's blood. She was with child. He was still coming to terms with that. Maester Lewin had told them that morning that he was indeed going to be a father. Anna had already had to tell him that she was not made from glass, and Uncle Roderick had slapped his back in congratulation so hard that he suspected that there would be a bruise. The man had hands like hams. Speaking of Uncle Roderick, he could see him in the courtyard below the gatehouse, where he was having an intense conversation with Lord Dondarrion and Lord Dane. The two Southerners were popular in Winterfell, both polite and well-spoken, but it was also important to remember that they were both also very formidable warriors. Lord Dane's sword was especially interesting, given its history, and Micken had been a frequent visitor to the practice yards in an effort to see the sword. Star metal, he said it was. The rarest of the rarest kind of metal at that, and even there was something odd about it. The Stormlander and his Dornish squire were practicing their swordwork now, using practice swords, with Uncle Roderick watching them and barking instructions about their footwork. To one side stood Thoros of Myr. The Red Priest was no mean warrior himself, as Jory could attest to. Pike and the blazing sword were still burnt into his mind. There were others in the yards, practicing with various weapons. Theon Greyjoy was teaching the terrible threesome archery in one corner, whilst Lord Stark was talking with his eldest two sons about swordwork in another, whilst Lady Arya watched from a wooden platform to one side. He wondered if Anna was going to have a boy or a girl. Did it matter? It would be good to continue the castle name, but with a second long night coming, well, all he wanted was a living child and a living wife after the birth of that child. And then Cregan on the topmost tower shouted down to him that he could see movement on the road, on the horizon, a great column of men on horses. Jory raced to the postern door and then up the stairs inside the tower to where Cregan was standing. The guard pointed and Jory pulled out the Mirish spyglass that Lord Rosestock had gifted the garrison of Winterfell the previous day. Whoever was captain of the guard for the day was told, in no uncertain terms, not to drop it. It was too valuable. Focusing it carefully on the road that came down from the King's Road, he waited and searched, and, yes, there they were. A long column of men, which what looked like some women, trotting down the road, banners flying at the head, some with stags and some with lions. "Aye," he muttered, "that's the king." And with that, obeying Lord Stark's orders, he pulled out a horn and blew a long, low note on it, as hard as he could. There was a startled moment of silence in the courtyard below, and then everyone was scurrying around like a flock of birds. He turned to take one last stare north and then he clattered down the stairs. Robb. He had to confess that he was nervous as he washed his face quickly and then stared into the mirror. Certainly his hand shook more than a little as he rubbed his chin, and he forced it to stop. He could not be nervous, not on this day. He turned and started to dress himself. There was a little time until the king arrived, but he forced himself to dress quickly, pulling the shirt on, lacing it, and then tucking it into his trousers. The leather jerkin next, the belt, and then the boots. He grabbed his cloak, too warm in the walls of Winterfell to put it on, yet took ice from its stand, clicked his tongue at Grey Wind, who had been watching all of this with a fascinated tilt of the head, and then walked out of his room and down the corridor. As he emerged into the courtyard and pulled his cloak on, he had to admit to a flood of emotion. He remembered the king's arrival in that hideous future that would not be, and there were some parts that were alike and more that were unalike, but he still felt nervous. Father was standing there again, but this time with the fist of winter thrust into a loop of leather attached to his belt, so that its head was just below his armpit. Mother was next to him, chivying people with looks and gestures as they thundered past her, and Frostfira was a silent presence to his left, with Rickon and Fleetfoot at her feet. He took his place next to Father, Grey Wind at his feet, and then watched as the others lined up to his right. Sansa had Domeric behind her, whilst Bran stood next to Robert Arryn and Edric Storm, which didn't surprise him. And then there was Jon. That was a big change from the last time, Jon's legitimization, and it was right to have him there, with Ghost at his feet. But as the others took their places, Jory and his wife, Roderick Castle, Theon and Mist, Lords Rosestock, Dane and Dondarrion and so many others, he noticed a few absences. The Lannisters were missing. He knew why Geryon Lannister wanted to keep the news of his return quiet for the time being, whilst Tyrion Lannister said that he was too busy and that he wanted to avoid his sister for as long as possible, and that besides the courtyard would be too crowded for him to see things clearly. The other absence was more personal. Where was Arya? Father was thinking the same thing, judging by his scowl, and then his errant sister ran up, Nymeria at her feet. Arya was once again wearing a helmet, and he smothered a grin as Father shook his head, took the helmet off and handed it to a grinning Roderick Castle. He hid a wince. That had happened in that other time as well. Hopefully that would be the only thing that would happen again. There was a lot riding on this. He looked ahead and schooled his features. He could hear the rumble of horses on the road now, and as he looked at the gateway the first outriders rode through, holding Baratheon banners that snapped in the wind, followed by riders bearing Lannister banners. And then the trickle of riders became a stream and then a river as the courtyard started to fill up. Perhaps Tyrion Lannister had been right. And then a figure in a white cloak and the helmet of a king's guard appeared, followed by another one, and he readied himself. What would the king be like this time, now that things were moving? Reports said that he had changed and was more active. Just how active was revealed by the hulking figure that rode through the gateway. Oh, this was not the fat king of his memories. Robert Baratheon was still a large man, but this time his chest seemed to be wider than his gut. He was different in other ways. His hair was cut short and he was clean-shaven, and there was something about his posture that was different. Last time he'd sat on his horse as if he was tired of everything. This time he seemed to blaze with an internal fire, and there was the hilt of an old and very large sword visible over one shoulder. Was that Stormbreaker? Robb swapped an astonished glance with father, before going back to looking at the flood of riders, some of whom were pulling off their helmets. Yes, there were already differences. He was sure that one man was Sir Barristan Selmy, whilst another was Stannis Baratheon. But then there were the others, the hated faces. He set his face and squashed the hatred. Jaime Lannister, as languid and dismissive of all he saw as ever. And Joffrey, with the hound behind him. The prince looked the same arrogant little shit that he had been before, looking about the courtyard with a smug smile, as if he thought that this was barely better than a peasant's hovel. Then he caught sight of Sansa and preened, sending her a look that he obviously thought was an attempt to charm her. Robb eyed his sister out of the corner of his eye. She seemed not to have noticed the look. Good. Other faces caught his eye as an open carriage rolled in. Ah. Cersei Lannister, as cold and false as always, a look of the utmost indifference on her face, with her other children next to her. And then he sensed Domeric stiffen to one side and just about caught his delighted smile and then mutter of Sansa, "That's Lord Redfort, from the Vale." And Lord Royce next to him. He looked at the two men carefully and then nodded. More major lords. In answer to the call perhaps. They hadn't been there that first time. But then he saw the king bring his horse to a halt and then dismount remarkable quickly for such a large man. No stairs this time. As he did so father knelt, with everyone following his lead. Robert Baratheon strode towards them, looming over them all as he came to a halt. And then he gestured with his right hand, an upwards wave of the fingers. Father stood again, everyone again following him, and looked at his friend. The king looked him up and down and then stopped at the Fist of Winter. "Nice stick," he said eventually. "Almost as good as my old warhammer." Father tilted his head slightly and then looked at the sword on the king's back. "Nice knife," he said in the same almost dismissive tone of voice as the king. "Almost as good as my old sword." There was a long moment of silence and then the king threw his head back, roared with laughter and then embraced father, who was laughing just as hard. "Gods, Ned, I've missed you, old friend," the king said as they broke apart. 9 years. Where have you been for 9 years? Guarding the north for you, your grace, father replied. The smile slipped from the king's face. And now I know what from. We met a man of the Night's Watch on the road. He had the head of a white in a cage. We need to talk of that, and this call. He looked at Frostfire. And your direwolves, I never thought I'd ever see the like of them. Your mace too. Quite the natter we need to have. After I meet your family, of course. He could tell that father was a bit bemused, but in a good way, before he nodded and the king turned to mother. "Cat," he boomed, embracing her with one arm whilst using the other to ruffle the head of an indignant rooken who was visibly thinking of biting it. "As lovely as ever." Then he paused and took a half step back. "Cat, you're positively radiant. Glowing even. Are you?" Mother nodded with a blush and the king boomed with laughter and slapped father on the back so hard that he almost fell over. "Ned, you old dog. You always wanted a big family." "Oh. Sorry Ned, don't know my own strength. Anyway, best wishes for the babe, cat." And then suddenly the king was in front of him. He swept him from head to toes with a remarkably shrewd look. Last time his blue eyes had been bleary and a bit bloodshot. This time they were clear and seemed to miss little. "So, you're Robb, my namesake. I see that Ned's given you ice." "Aye, your grace," he replied with nod. The king tilted his head again as he assessed him and Robb felt a slight shiver of something indefinable as he was the subject to such prolonged scrutiny. "I know the north is a hard place, But your eyes are older than your face, he rumbled eventually, before stepping over to Sansa. Sansa, yes. My, you are the very image of your mother when she was your age. Sansa bowed her head and the king moved to Arya. And who would you be? Arya. She eyed him up and down. Your Grace. The last two words emerged in a rush and were obviously prompted by her remembering her manners at the last minute. The king bent down a little and looked at her. Gods, you're a fierce one. Can you ride? A nod. Use a bow. A nod. Use a sword. A half nod, followed by Arya freezing and looking in father's direction. The king roared with laughter and straightened up again. Gods, he said again, this time with a note of sadness in his voice, Lyanna, come again. He stepped over to Bran and looked at him. Brandon, yes. Bran beamed at him. Yes, your Grace, and these are my friends, Robert and Edric. The king smiled as he looked at them and then he blinked. Robert Arryn. Lord Arryn's son bowed formally. Your Grace. For some reason the king seemed to be genuinely thrown. Gods, lad, I mean that, you've grown. Robert Arryn beamed at him. Thank you, your Grace. The king nodded at him and then greeted his bastard son with a boisterous smile and a careful pat on his face. Then he turned to father again. Let's go to your solar Ned. We need talk at once. Stannis too. And with that the two of them strode off, joined by Stannis Baratheon and with Sir Barristan Selmy following. Robb watched them go with a slight sigh. And now it begins, he muttered. Fury meets Winter. Chapter 33. Chapter text. Apologies, I probably should have updated this a bit more often. Here's a mega chapter to make up for it. Jaime. He watched the king stride off with the tooth grinder and Stark the Stern and repressed a small worm of, well, he wasn't sure what. Worry. No. Unease. Perhaps. He sighed. Well, at least their long journey was over. Winterfell. It was bigger than he had expected and a little less muddy. Oh, and quite crowded at the moment. As the crowd broke up and the king's party started to get organized in unpacking their things, he looked about. Lady Stark was talking politely to Cersei, who was being cold and polite back at her. Oh dear. His sister disliked their hostess. Well, perhaps she would start to like her a bit after Joffrey was betrothed to Sansa. He thought about this and then smothered a guffaw. No. No one would ever be good enough for Joffrey in Cersei's eyes. And with that he looked around. Someone was missing. Where was Tyrion? He stared around the scurrying crowd but failed to see the short but toweringly sardonic figure of his brother. And then he saw a familiar face, no, pair of faces. Jory Castle, is it not? He drawled as he walked up to the man and the oddly familiar woman. Are you well? I am, Sir Jaime Castle replied. Be welcome to Winterfell. He looked about the place and smiled politely. The identity of the woman was still eluding him, until she turned to look at Robert Arryn, the boy who was so different now. And then something clicked in his mind. I remember you now. You work for Jon Arryn, as his son's nursemaid, do you not? She looked at him and then nodded gracefully. She seemed different, more alive somehow, less inclined to fade into the background. The last time he had seen her she had been wearing a shapeless dress, but now she was resplendent in a dark brown dress that fitted really rather well and, well, she was standing rather close to Castle. Was the man bedding her? I am indeed his nursemaid, Sir Jaime, she replied, before sighing as the boy in question shrieked with laughter at something that Edric Storm said. Although at the moment he needs me reminding him to mind his manners rather than any nursing. Jaime smothered a smile with his hand, as Castle openly smiled, before turning to him. You must pardon how close we stand to each other, Sir Jaime, but Anna and I are now married. His eyebrows flew up. Ah, so they were officially bedding each other. He smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. Congratulations to the pair of you and the very best wishes for the future. Now, I wonder if you could tell me if you know where my brother is. Easily recognizable fellow, uses very long words at times. Castle nodded. Aye, Sir Jaime. Last I heard he was in the library in the main keep. Of course, he sighed. I should have looked there first. That or the nearest brothel, he didn't say out loud. Where is it exactly? Robert Arryn, Edric Storm and Bran Stark hurtled past, all gabbling something about horses, and Anna Castleside nodded her head at Jaime, kissed her husband on the cheek and then picked up her skirts and ran after the trio at a surprisingly fast speed. I can show you, Sir Jaime Jory Castle said with a small smile and then looked at the retreating figures to one side. Those three are something of a handful. So I see, Jaime replied. Robert Arryn appears totally changed from the last time I saw him. A shadow crossed Castle's face. I was there at White Harbour when it was discovered that his medicine was in fact poison. He has been weaned off it and, well, you can see the difference. The boy is cleverer, no longer shakes, can ride and has seen more of the Sunday. They crossed the courtyard in silence after that, turned a corner, went across another smaller courtyard towards a doorway, up some stairs, down a long set of corridors and finally arrived at a large door. The main library, Sir Jaime Castle said wryly. The domain of your brother, Mayor Stillowin and the Lady Shuristone. Good luck. And with that he nodded and walked off. As he walked into the library he could smell the usual aroma of old books and heavily dusted shelves, and he paused for a moment and smiled. Yes, one of the natural domains of Tyrion. Then he looked around. A lot of shelves, a lot of books. Some of the former looked new and a lot of the latter looked old. Hearing a murmur to one side he strode quietly in that direction. Tyrion was sitting in a chair in front of a large table that was covered in books and pieces of parchment. On the other side of the table was a woman who appeared to be about Tyrion's age. She had dark hair, a square chin and a nose that was a tad too large to make her pretty. She was looking through a large book in front of her, glancing occasionally at a picture on a piece of parchment to one side. It looks a bit like the Throne of Winter, only it's older, she said with a frown. How strange. And that inscription. I'm glad you didn't sit in it. Given the bones around it, I'm very glad as well, Tyrion replied. He had what looked like the beginnings of a beard on his face and he would occasionally shift in his seat with a wince as if his ass hurt. I'd rather stay sane. He had no idea what they were talking about and he was about to walk closer when all of a sudden his brother's head came up and tilted to one side. Hello, Jaime. You can always tell when I'm behind you, Jaime chuckled as he approached the table and then sketched a bow. How? It's the oil you use on the leather straps for your armor, his brother said with a smirk. Quite distinctive. My vanity will be the death of me, Jaime smiled as he stood there and inspected Tyrion. He was a little thinner and his eyes were a bit different, as if he had seen something. But perhaps you should introduce me to your companion. Tyrion started a little and then looked at the woman, who was regarding them both with what looked like carefully hidden amusement. Where are my manners? Daisy, this is my brother Sir Jaime Lannister, Knight of the Kingsguard. Jaime, this is the Lady Daisy Shuristone, the Shuristone of Shuristone as she is known here. Jaime bowed his head. My lady. It is good to meet you, good sir, she replied with a graceful sitting half bow. Lord Tyrion here has told me much about you. He eyed his brother sardonically. Should I be worried, brother? Tyrion smirked at him. Just a little. Then he smiled something more genuine. Of course not. Lady Shuristone gathered up some papers and a book before standing. I will leave you two to your reunion. Tyrion, please let me know when we can resume our discussion about what you saw at the wall. I'll be helping Lady Stark with the preparations for tonight's feast for the King Dotto and I'll send a little more liniment. As she bustled out, Jaime saw the look that he gave her, retreating back and sighed a little. Oh dear. He drew up a chair and eased himself into it, listened for the sound of the door closing and then looked at his brother. You like her? What's not to like? Tyrion said with a careless shrug of the shoulders that was a little too careless. She's clever, she's fierce, she likes books like very few people I've ever met. She's striking and she's near enough to my own age. So, are you courting her? Something flashed over his brother's face, a combination of pain and sorrow and anger. No, Tyrion said eventually. I dare not. I care about her too much to risk her. Not after what happened to Tisha. Ah. He winced. One day he would have to tell Tyrion the truth about that. The two are not the same though, brother. This Lady Shuristone is, well, a lady. Is she related to any of the great houses of the north or anywhere else? She's cousin to Ned Stark himself. He late father was very well liked. Sherestone. Sherestone, he mulled the name over. Then something sparked at the back of his head. Wait, there was a Sherestone at the Trident, or so I recall from the tales of the battle. A tall man on a horse with a battle axe who helped carve a hole through the line to allow Baratheon to get at Rhaegar Targaryen. He looked at Tyrion again. That was her father. Then she is nothing like Tisha, and not even father can criticize such a match. I know, but... Jaime, I'm nervous. I am very fond of her, but without father's permission. She's a cousin to the Lord of the North. Father wouldn't dare harm her. Might glare at her a bit though. Now what's all this here? And what was that last part about liniment? Tyrion winced. I'm still recovering from my ride south from the wall. We got back 2 days ago and my ass is still one giant bruise. He leant back in his chair, checked that there was no one else there and then smiled wryly. Father needs to know about just how fast Ned Stark can move when he needs to. Jaime, a week ago I was at Castle Black with Ned Stark, 2 of his sons and a group of others. He stared at his brother in some shock as he ran the numbers through his head. But, that means that. I mean that must have been hundreds of miles and... Tyrion, that's impossible. Not if you have a series of waypoints arranged, each with fresh horses. I have galloped harder and further than I have ever done in my life this past week, and by all the gods my legs and ass and every part of me still aches a bit, even now. As I said, father needs to know how fast Ned Stark can move at times. Jaime nodded thoughtfully. And how was the wall? There was a pause as Tyrion flipped through some pieces of parchment and then slid one over towards him. He picked it up and looked at it, his eyebrows rising. It was a sketch in charcoal of what had to be the wall. Then another sketch slid towards him. Castle Black perhaps. And then a third. He picked it up and felt his eyes widen as he stared at it in shock. Is this a giant? On a mammoth? Yes, they really exist. I've seen them. He hesitated for a moment as he ruffled through a number of other sketches. Members of the Night's Watch have been going south from the wall with small cages that were made by the first men. The cages contain white parts. Have you seen one yet? He went still for a moment. Yes, he said wryly. I saw one the other day. It was brought before his grace himself. A head in a cage that still moved. Tell me something, how was it done? His words made Tyrion peer at him with one of his head down, lowering looks, which was a sign that he was either puzzled or annoyed. How was what done? The head in the cage. How was it made to move? Wires. Levers. It had to me from MYR, yes. Tyrion's hands went still on the parchments. Then he pulled another one out and slid it across the table at him. Jaime, it was real. Whites are real. I should know. I've seen them. I almost died twice at the wall, once from rogue wildlings and the second time from, well, whites. He looked down at the picture. No, pictures. Dead men running towards the person who had drawn the picture. Severed limbs. And an odd gait of some kind that looked like a mouth. You drew these? I did. I normally keep my artistic endeavors to myself, but in this case I thought that I had to sketch what I remembered. What I saw. I went beyond the wall, Jaime. At the night fort. He looked at them. You saw these things? I did. But... Tyrion, the whole point of chopping someone's head off is to make sure that they never move anything at all ever again. Dead men and women don't move. These did. Tyrion said the words with a brutal clarity. They ran towards me. Or rather towards the half-white we had with us, trying to kill him and us. It's a long and complicated story. But yes, they were dead but they still moved. They were sent by these. Another picture, this time blue ink over charcoal lines that showed thin-faced things that looked like men but weren't. They wore old-fashioned armor and they held odd swords. What are these things? Others. They are the reason behind the wall, why the first men were so terrified that they built something that split the land in two and then founded the Night's Watch, an order that has lasted for who knows how many thousands of years. And let me tell you, brother, they terrified me. The very air around me grew colder as they approached. If we had not had 3 men with Valyrian steel swords there, well, I would have died. Fighting one was bad enough. None of this made any sense at all. Tyrion had fought one of these things. You fought one. With the help of this. He held up an ancient and rather odd-looking axe. Peculiarly enough, it's a Lannister family heirloom, left at the Night Fort by a distant relative of ours. It's called Rocktooth. He'd been wrong. Now none of it made any sense at all. So, you went to the Night Fort to, help a half-white and then fought with full whites and others? Yes. There was a long pause. Are you drunk? No, Tyrion said the word with a dreadful finality. He was pretty sure that he wasn't drunk himself, and he stared at his brother and then at the pictures and then at Tyrion again. Someone opened the door behind him and he heard the boots of 2 people approaching. You seem to have had quite a trip, Tyrion. Oh, I've barely scratched the surface yet. Tyrion looked up at whoever was approaching. I haven't told him yet, he said, raising his voice a little. I hope he reacts better than you did. The newcomer's voice sounded familiar, very familiar indeed. But that was impossible. He turned and then gaped. Uncle Gerion was standing there, with a young man next to him. Hello, nephew. The dead are marching on the wall. He was pretty sure that life would never make sense ever again. Brynden. He was amazed by the change in the great hall of the twins as he stepped into it. Old tapestries had been torn down, windows uncovered, and somewhere high above a large trio of windows had been unblocked. Now, shards of light speared down onto the dais, illuminating Lord Stephen Free, Lord of the Crossing, and his oldest son, Sir Ryman. The latter looked as if recent events had shaken his wits and somehow shocked some sense into him. The previous night had not been a restful one. It had been immediately obvious that Walder Free was deathly ill in the wake of the apoplexy that had struck him down. He had been carried away at once by his immediate family, including those of his immediate sons that were there. The Green Man had watched them go with an inscrutable look on his face, before turning to the others. He will not last the night, he told them. Be careful. This place is like a tinderbox. And he had been right. As dusk fell and the word from Walder Free's chambers continued to be bad, the atmosphere in the twins had been strained, with various sons and grandsons of the wretched man stalking about the place in clumps, hissing at each other, being particularly hated relatives. Knuckles had been white as they gripped the pommels of swords. Brynden, Brian and the Green Man had stalked through the place, preparing for their departure the next day. Yoren of the Night's Watch had gone on his way, riding grimly south with his head in a cage, bound for Riverrun. He hoped that Hoster was well when he arrived. He had his issues with his brother, but he did not want him to have the same reaction as Walder Bloody Free. The late Lord Free had finally died just after midnight, whereupon his eldest son had shown that he had nerves of steel. He had immediately claimed his inheritance, being the first in line to the title and also being surrounded by his sons and grandsons with swords that were in some cases half-drawn. Oddly enough, one of them had been the Fool of the Crossing, Egon, also known as Jingle Bell. Only there had been nothing foolish about him at that moment, just a grim-faced man in dark clothing. The Green Man's party had immediately supported the new Lord Free. Certain others had not. Sir Innes Free had tried to cull the top of the family tree a bit and replace his older brother, a silly idea as his second oldest brother Aemon Free lived in the Westerlands. The head of Sir Innes was now on a spike on the southern end of the twins, along with his son Roriger. It had been senseless and foolish beyond words, and he had wondered at the time why the man had done it. Now, as he approached the table with the Green Man and Brian, he could see that times had changed right there and then. The new Lord Free had a piece of parchment in his hand and seemed to be quietly pleased about something. As they approached, he stood, and Brynden realized that he was sitting in a far plainer chair than the one that his father had always used. Lady Brian, Sir Brynden, Sir Duncan, or should I call you just the Green Man? I do not mean to cause offense. I am just the Green Man now, came the response from the former Knight Commander of the Kingsguard. I stopped being Sir Duncan the Tall when I set foot on the Isle of Faces. Lord Free nodded and then looked down at the parchment. House Free, he said in a voice like iron, will shortly be sending a great deal of support to the war. The list of those of my brothers and nephews and grandnephews who have decided to take the Black is a long one. He looked up. He seemed taller somehow. I will also send word to the Lord Commander, apologizing for the lack of support that the Night's Watch received from my late father. He did not believe. I do. I heard the call. So did my sons. Some have not been the same since for the right reasons. Yes, Brindon could see that. Egon Free, once known as Jingle Bell, was standing to one side, his hands behind his back and a sword at his side. He seemed more focused than before. Interesting. But had he been changed by the call, or had the call merely made the man within stop pretending to be a fool? I will not wait for a man of the Night's Watch to arrive to send them north, Lord Free continued. Instead I will send them north to the Neck, to Moat Cailin, and then hand them over to Lord Reed's men. And then he straightened up again. The others have returned. Lord Tully must know of this, if he does not know already. I will not be known as my father was, as the late Lord Free. House Free stands with House Tully and House Stark. Brindon nodded with the others, and then as they swept out he wondered how long those Horsens Blackwolder and Lame Lothar would last on the wall. Not long at all with luck. Ned. Robert was very different indeed from the tales that Robb and Jory had told him. Oh, he was still big, and if he looked carefully he could see where the fat had been on him, but there was more muscle on him that he had had at Pike. And he seemed to blaze with energy, the kind that he hadn't seen since the Trident. That energy occasionally led him astray, as twice he charged down the wrong corridor, before being recalled by Ned's amused coughs, but it was as if the years had rolled back. As for Stannis, he was a little bolder than at Pike, but still just as quiet and intense. But there was something a little different about him, the way that he looked about as if searching for something. When they got to his solar he placed the fist on his desk, watched Robert prop what could only be Stormbreaker against the wall, waved them into the chairs that he had prepared for them, closed the door very firmly, and then poured 3 goblets of wine. No need for bread, salt and wine, not those two, although he would have been happier if it had been Jon Arryn instead of Stannis. Thank you, Ned, Robert said as he took his goblet. Gods, I would never have believed it. The change in Jon's boy. I'm sorry I didn't talk properly to your bastard son, I was that shaken by it. I'll tell you both something I'd never admit to Jon, I was beginning to suspect that Robert Arryn was a half-wit. Poor boy, all those fits, the wobbling head, the lack of brains. And then to see him like that. He quaffed some of the wine and then looked at Ned with a shrewd eye. He's no longer taking that, medicine of his, is he? Ned sat in his chair and sipped his own wine. No. He's been weaned off it. And the less he took the more he grew. Jory Castle escorted him north with his nurse, Anna, and from he said the lad started to change not long after White Harbour, where the poison was discovered. He's fast friends with my Bran and your Edric now. The terrible threesome, that's what some call them now. Rightly so at times. Robert laughed at that, whilst a ghost of a smile crossed the face of Stannis. Then the laughing stopped as his old friend's eyes examined him. You look like shit. You've been pushing yourself, haven't you? Time to tell a few truths. You heard that I was at Castle Black. He waited for the nods. A week ago I was still there. I got back to Winterfell 2 days ago. There was a moment of silence as Robert blinked at him, and then he shared an incredulous glance with his brother before straightening from his slouch. Bloody hell, Ned, Castle Black to here in 5 days. That's faster than you moved after the Trident. He felt a smile come and go. I had to talk to the Lords of the North there. And then I had to greet my king. If you call me your grace, here, in your solar, I'll clip you about the ear, Ned, Robert rumbled. There was a creaking noise as he then leant forwards in his chair. Are things that bad at the wall then? He pulled a slight face. Better than they were. Worse than they need to be. The Night's Watch were down to 3 inhabited castles on the wall. After all that's happened lately and the people and supplies that have arrived, now the numbers doubled, nay tripled. The builders on the wall are repairing and replacing as much they can, but they need more. Lord Commander Gia Mormont came south with me, in order to speak with you about what the Night's Watch needs. Robert nodded slowly and then looked at Stannis, who raised his eyebrows. We saw a head in a cage, on the way here, Lord Stark. A white. Ned nodded. Then what else are we facing? Ned sighed. The others. But before we get to what we're facing, you need to know something. I was at the wall for another reason. I've met with Mance Rayder, the so-called king beyond the wall. Under my authority as the Warden of the North, I've given him and his wildlings, the free folk as they call themselves, permission to pass through the wall and settle in the gift and new gift. Black eyebrows seemed to fly upwards like birds. Bloody hells, Ned, Robert rumbled. Why? The wildlings are naught but savages, as you told me yourself. He replied, looking his old friend in the eye. And I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things, and I'm man enough to admit it. He sighed. The wildling raids against the wall happened because of a reason. They were being pushed south. Something was massacring them, forcing them to flee, so they did. They were planning to force a way through the wall, that was how desperate they were. He paused. There are a lot of the buggers. Far more than I ever imagined. Rayder said that he could call on a host of 100,000 of his people. And before you tell me that's impossible, I've seen the wildlings passing through the main gate at Castle Black. Hundreds of them, hour after hour, an endless line of them. Giant and their mammoths too. All fleeing. All terrified. Ned stood up and slid the fist back into his belt. And we've been lucky. We almost had no warning of what's coming at all. Because. I mean Robert, do you remember the letter from Lionel I got when we were at the Uri? It was on the day that Denise tried to lift your warhammer over his head and almost brained himself. Robert's face softened for a moment as he remembered. I do. What of it? She wrote that on Brandon's naming day he was in this room with our father for a long time, and that when she saw him next he was different. Somber, as if he knew something. I think that my father told him something. And I think he walked over to the wall and pulled the tapestry to one side to reveal the door. That my father took him in here. He rolled the tapestry back to that the bulk of the side of it could be held by a metal hook on the wall, and then opened the door. Robert and Stannis had stood the moment that he revealed the door, and now they stepped forwards. He had lanterns ready and he led them into the passage, before stopping at the old door with the ancient wolf-shade carving. Ned, what is this place? Robert rumbled. It's ancient. Reminds me of the crypts at Storm's End. He inserted the key and turned it, opening the door. The hinges still creaked a bit, but at least the dust was gone. He ushered them in and closed the door behind them. We still don't know what a lot of this is. The oldest of the records that were stored in here was on hide and were badly faded. Starks of old kept things in here. Secrets. Secrets that, thanks to Aerys Targaryen, I never knew about. Robert was staring about the place in bafflement. Then he blinked. You came of age in the Vale, with me. And by the time I saw Winterfell again, my father and Brandon were both dead. I never knew this place even existed until recently. Then how did you discover it? Stannis asked the question as he stared at the skull with the horns. Time to tread carefully, at least for a moment. I had reason to believe that something was happening north of the wall. There was a message from the old gods. He paused, taken a little aback at the lack of scoffing, and then ploughed on. I called on the lords of the north to send me all the intelligence they had about the others. You remember Great John Umber, Robert? Oh, little man, quite quiet, Robert replied with a straight face. I remember him. He checked on an ancient Stark relic that my ancestors had given his thousands of years ago, telling them to check on it and that if it ever changed color, whoever was Lord of the Last Hearth was to bring it to Winterfell. Great John Umber did check on it and he brought it straight here once he saw it had changed color. He placed it in my hand and I had a vision of the north, like I was flying like a bird, and then the wall and the wildlings, and then a place called Hopeman, where there was a thing shaped like a man, with horns in his head. The Night King. The king of the others. I saw him, and he somehow saw me. When I came back to my senses in my solar, I told everyone to search Winterfell for anything hidden, before, well, passing out. There was still a lack of scoffing, although Stannis was frowning a bit. You don't sound surprised. Ned, I stood where the old godswood used to be in Storm's End and looked down at a weirwood tree sapling, touched it and had a vision of a hidden place, Robert said in a very serious voice. Edric told me he'd had the same vision when he touched the sapling. And later on we discovered that place, the crypts where the Durandons, the Storm Kings of old, were buried. There was a statue there with a sword. Stormbreaker, back there in your solar. And the statue, its eyes lit up with green fire, and it called me Storm King, before giving me the sword. Magic has returned to the world, Stannis said through slightly gritted teeth. The statues of the seven in the Great September in King's Landing have changed. They face north now in warning, after telling a Septon that death marched on the wall. His face worked for a moment. And then, he stopped, rallied, tried to start again, before pulling out a handkerchief and blowing his nose. My niece Shireen is no longer marked by grayscale, Ned Robert said in a surprisingly gentle voice. She and Gendry, one of my bastards, found a godswood on Dragonstone. There was a heart tree there. She placed a hand on it and the old gods healed her. Ned stared at the bald Baratheon and then clapped him on the shoulder. Then we shall raise a goblet of wine to her continued good health. I am glad to hear of that. Thank you, Ned, I mean Lord Stark, Stannis rumbled, putting his handkerchief away. So, Winterfell was searched then? It was, and this was found. He gestured at the walls around it. Then he picked up the little stone bowl, which was covered in a piece of heavy cloth. And this? He pulled the cloth aside. Inside lay the hearthstone. It was not quite shining with light, but it was brighter than it had been on the day that the great Jon first brought it to him. The stone's the hearthstone. We don't know what the bowl is called. Placing the hearthstone in the bowl sent out the call. The two Baratheons peered at the stone and the bowl. So that's it? Robert asked. That sent out the call. Doesn't seem like much, does it? But it's drawn a lot of people here to the north. I think it restored all kinds of connections. Like to the direwolves. Something else to tell you about. He eyed Robert. You didn't seem too surprised at the sight of Frostfyre and the other direwolves, did you? Another bark of laughter from Robert and a right twist of the lips from Stannis. Word on the road and word in the keeps and holdfasts on the way here were of Ned Stark and his direwolf. I told everyone not to react too much at the sight of her. Wasn't easy. Where is she? She comes and goes. Wouldn't surprise me if she's guarding this room. That should surprise Barristan Selmy a bit. Right. These others. What do they want? All the records, both here and at Castle Black. Maester Aemon has found a huge cache from the Night Fort. All agree on one thing. They want us all dead. Every living thing. You can't bargain with them. You can't reason with them. You can't even threaten them. The wildlings have seen them in the far north, beyond the wall. The Night's Watch has seen them on the first of the first men, from the protection of an old secret vantage point called the Overlook. Near a place called Craster's Keep as well. And my sons Robb and Jon, as well as a number of other men and women, fought 4 of them and a small horde of whites just north of the wall by the Night Fort. Robert frowned a little. Your sons are alive. What did they have that the wildlings did not? Dragon glass. Valyrian steel. I gave Robb ice when I found the Fist of Winter. He slapped the mace at his side, in here. And star metal, the kind of metal that the first men used to make some of their most important weapons. Like the Fist. And perhaps Stormbreaker too. They're rare, but there are others. He raised both eyebrows. The Lannisters had an axe called Rocktooth. Tyrion Lannister found it at the Night Fort. He was with Robb and Jon. Killed another with it too. A silence fell. Robert seemed to be having trouble processing what he had just heard, and Stannis actually had a finger in one ear to clear some wax out or something like that. Eventually Stannis said what his brother could not. You, what? The imp killed another. Robert blurted. Oh, He looked at them both. I'm still not sure if, based on what Robb said, he wielded it or it wielded him, but he killed one of the others with it. And before you say anything else, you need to see this. He reached out, tugged on a glove and pulled out one of the swords that Robb had brought back with him from the fight at the Night Fort. It was a long, wicked blade, made from some kind of crystallized ice that had somehow not melted, and he needed the glove because he hated the way that it felt in his hand, as if it radiated not just cold but evil too. Take out one of your daggers and then test it against this thing. Strike hard. Robert gave him a quizzical look and then pulled out a dagger and struck hard, indeed hard enough that he staggered as the dagger shattered into a dozen hoarfrost-covered pieces. Gods! Robert gasped. That was good steel too. No wonder the wildlings flee them, Stannis said as he stroked his beard. What do they still use, north of the wall? Bronze. But Valyrian steel works against that thing. It does, Ned replied as he put the horrible thing away. We don't know why. Might be that the Valyrians used dragon fire to make their steel, not that we know anything more about that. There was another silence. Robert finally broke it. The imp wields an axe like Stormbreaker. Ned replied. He's changed a bit. He knows what's out there now. Perhaps he can tell his father. Gods, muttered Robert. How is my good father going to react to all of this? He might take some persuading, but there's something